You were just telling me you had what were you saying about your TBI? How did you get a traumatic brain injury?
Playing football.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I got, it was funny. We played in East Bridgewater. I grew up in Hull, south of Boston.
Pull us a little closer.
Yep. And I was running back and a linebacker, and I took a hit during the play, and I scored on like an 80-yard touchdown. But like I remember running, and like the cerebrospinal fluid came out of my nose.
Oh.
Yeah, and I was like, just really wonky. And everybody's jumped, I scored the touchdown. I go back to my coach and I explain what was happening. But this is like, the 70s, something like the freaking dark ages. So I get sent back in, obviously with the swollen brain, skull fracture and TBI, and ended up manifesting as a seizures disorder. I would get waves of petit mal, grand mal seizures that required medication and hospitalizations and massive depression for weeks on end. And the moral of the story is I then went in to meet with the shamans in Ecuador and do a series of ayahuasca ceremonies for many weeks. And I came back and healed the seizure disorder. I never took medication again. I got off the Dilantin, the Depakote, the Neurontin, and I haven't had auras or seizures in like 15 years.
Auras?
Auras are kind of like it's like almost a precognition of a seizure. You know when it's coming. So it's this weird twilight zone. And with the seizures, especially the petit mals, I would get waves of them in the sleeping waking state, and they would cause massive depression for weeks on end. I mean, I couldn't freaking move. I was like paralyzed, and it was insidious and intractable. And all this is verified by my former neurologist, Dr. Allison Ryan in Northampton, Mass. So I am indebted to the spirits of ayahuasca, let's say.
Holy cow, man. So after you did the ayahuasca, you never got any seizures or auras?
No.
How old were you?
Probably like 17 years ago, something like that. Yeah. What was I? No, the seizures didn't manifest until a little later. I got the injury early on, and then I started to get like neurological dysregulation and things like that. But the real seizures, I think, started manifesting in my 20s. And
how long after the injury did the seizures start coming on?
7, 8 years.
7 or 8 years, really?
Yeah.
And then after the seizures happened, you did the ayahuasca how many years later?
It's all a blur.
Yeah.
In my 30s, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, in my 30s.
And what do you think it was about the ayahuasca that was able to completely get rid of the seizures and all that stuff?
It's a good, it's anti-parasitic. It has all these efficacious applications for the human body. Mm-hmm. I could tell you a metaphysical theory, that one thing was I faced all these neuroses and self-doubt and this internal conflict and trauma within myself, like everybody suffers with. So I really straightened out a lot of the things that drove my behaviors in life that were unhealthy. Addictions, seeking externally. I was able to sit with myself. There's a part of the brain called the colostrum, right? The ego center that literally gets put to sleep and anesthetized when you do plant medicine ceremonies, when you do psychedelics. John Hopkins figured that out in like 2020. So I like to say the ego gets put to sleep. The tyrannical operating software of the separate self, the mystics would say. It gets put to sleep and you can see with clear vision. And it's like, you get like this life review. You can see everything. You can see how you behave unlovingly and why. You can see the drives and the unworthiness, and you can do something about it. You can make these changes in your life. But the day-to-day tyranny of the ego doesn't allow you to see that. It's in the way of, say your divine nature, for instance. So I believe that I removed a lot of that turmoil and judgment and all these, because all the judgments we have for others in the world are really judgments and unworthiness we feel about ourselves, projected to get a hit so you feel better and self-righteous like a freaking bad drug addict.
Right.
The reality is it's like that undoing of the trauma within that manifests in a better way. So moral of the story, I think there's a physiological aspect to ayahuasca, and I think there's a metaphysical one as well. It allows you to self-reflect, make changes in your life, And
Yeah,
that's my experience.
It lasts a while, right? A few hours.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I was doing San Pedro cactus as well, which is mescaline is the main ingredient there. There's like 15, 17 hour grueling, people say like, oh, you're just getting high or whatever. It's just like you face all your dark fears. It's terrifying often, these ceremonies, and don't go into it lightly, I would say,
Yeah.
And the shamans know this, and they're your tour guide through this experience, quite frankly. So they know what you're facing, and it's harrowing, But
Have you ever smoked straight up DMT?
what's the Bufo I have? That's the 5-MD. What the hell is it?
5-MeO DMT?
Correct. That I have.
And that lasts like 5 to 10 minutes, right?
That lasts quickly. Ayahuasca, psilocybin, those are multi-hour experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a similar thing. They all have the same mechanism or function of putting the ego to sleep and allowing you to see with clear vision.
I wonder, is that, you've done both. Is it a similar sort of experience when you're on ayahuasca, just longer lasting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a little more intense. DMT really blows the top off your ego. Right?
Oh, yeah. It really does blow the top off. I felt my soul leave my body.
Bingo. And it's tough to translate into this waking state that we appear to exist in. So people are like, what are those dudes talking about? But it's wild, as you know. And I did a ceremony in anticipation of coming here with the shamanista this weekend. And we could talk about that later if you want, or whenever. It's the same mechanism. It's the same thing that it keeps happening. It's like, wow, you're tapping into another reality. Mm-hmm. And I've done this, I'm a non-dualist, so I study like the Upanishads, the Ashtavakra Gita, Ramana Maharshi, Lao Tzu, Jesus, Buddha, all these mystics that say the same strange and specific thing and radical thing about the nature of reality. So for months, I just keep rereading the Ashtavakra Gita, which is considered, it's an ancient Sanskrit text that's considered like the most mind-bending metaphysical text in history. And I kept rereading it, and I got thrust into that state of the one, of timelessness. And I'm like, so it's not just like, oh, this substance is altering your brain chemistry. There are ways through fasting and meditation and other modalities.
Right.
As the mystics would say, it's like sahaja, your natural state. The ego state, the external searcher, the disaffected, hungry ghost is not your real state. So it's removing the blocks to your awareness is enlightenment. It's not accessing or gaining something in the external world, right? So it's a different dynamic. I have to remove the false beliefs to rediscover what I already am, which is a blissful state.
Yes.
Which is tough for people to believe. I get that, because it's like, what the you live 10 minutes in this world, it doesn't appear like that. You know what I mean?
Right. Man, what a gruesome injury. What your spinal fluid was coming out of your nose?
Yeah.
Jesus. And then what do they, when you first went in, I
didn't know for years later.
Were you in the hospital for a long time after that? Or
no. It was like back in there, you rub some dirt on it. The coaches, they didn't understand what happened.
You were right back in the game?
Right back in the game, right with the fucking swollen brain. And I just bought a hyperbaric chamber, actually. I'm going to start doing it to access some of the frozen brain, because it can't swell. And
to do what is a hyperbaric chamber going to do for your brain?
It frees up. It oxygenates the brain. Mm-hmm. And they say that when the injury occurs, you almost get cognitively frozen at a particular time when it happens. Excuse me. But, the moral of the story is that it led me down this path. My movie character had to go down this path, and I'm grateful for it, as twisted and painful as it's been. And I have a lot of empathy for people with depression, because I had this crippling, I couldn't move for weeks. It was painted my world black and gray. It was
yeah, no, it's brain injuries are known for being they're known for being endocrine disruptors. So they can really affect your hormone regulation and your testosterone levels. That's why a lot of football players or fighters or boxers or whatever that have had those extreme head injuries, they have to do hormone therapy after that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, then thanks for being open to that. You know, it's hopefully I know a lot of people who suffer similar things.
That explains the depression too, like low hormone, low testosterone levels and stuff like that. That can affect your whole body, including your mood and your depressive states and all that. So how did you get into all the stuff you're doing now? You wrote 2 books about giants and like Stonehenge and this ancient history. How did you get into this world?
I'm a stonemason by trade. So my brother and I run a dry mason's business in Weston, Mass.
Are you a Freemason?
No.
Okay.
People ask that. No, it's like I study Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. And
Okay.
I think they're interesting. We build art projects, utilitarian projects with quarried stone. We redo old walls. And we've been at it for like 25, 30 years. And one of the things we're avid hikers. And so we're out in the woods and we keep seeing these constructions that were thought to be colonial that are more seemingly Native American, anthropomorphic forms, cairns, turtles, serpents. And I'm like, whoa, this seems to be like this subtle Native American landscape of stone hidden in New England. And I wasn't the first one I found out I wasn't the first one to draw that conclusion. And other researchers have wrote about it. So what I did was, because I'm kind of a Rain Man record keeper type of guy, I went to the UMass library and started reading the town and county histories to see if there were any occurrences of colonists showing up and documenting pre-existing Native American walls in stone chambers and other structures. And in fact, there are in the historical record. So the colonists found Native American stonework in New England. Like it's not a great,
Right.
Incredible, because there were stone forts in Tennessee, in the Midwest. We know all about all the kivas and stuff. But the archaeological idea is that Native Americans didn't build with stonework in New England. So by virtue of reading through all these town and county histories, I started to find the most bizarre giant skeleton accounts, often by anatomists, scientists of the time, Smithsonian bureau agents, like buried obscurely in these voluminous documents in a time of inefficient communication. And I was told quickly these were all hoaxes. And I'm like, they reference a lot of the same anatomic anomalies: double rows of teeth, massive jawbones that fit over the face, femurs that are 28 and 32 inches long, which are clearly indicating 8-9 foot tall individuals. Artifacts found within context in little known burial techniques described as well. Because one of the arguments is like, these are mastodon bones or animal bones. But no, these are burial mound finds that have contextual context that matches with a lot of Native American burials, but they're absolutely enormous. Like the giants in the middle, and there's other burials like spokes of a whale. So I'm like, this doesn't read as a hoax. This doesn't make any logical sense, right? So I went down that road. I started to write. I hooked up with Hugh Newman, my co-author and buddy. And the gods lined up that I ended up with the show on history. A producer who's a friend of mine in Weston, Mass said, hey, my buddy told me to check out, this presentation you gave or something, what a book I wrote or whatever. I'm sorry. It was a presentation I gave. And he became more interested in the subject because, like, my brother and I, blue collar dudes. I think people look at us and like, I'm not blowing smoke up anybody's ass. I really don't have an agenda. I just find it fascinating, right?
Right.
And so it's like, even the History Channel execs that when we got the first show, it's like, I've never seen 2 guys seemingly so credible talk about such outrageous things, So people who know us, we're former decathletes and coaches, and our lives revolve around usually like being nice to people and helping kids and
Right.
like leading lives that aren't about bullshit and grifting,
Right. That's cool.
So we ended up we made a sizzle reel. It went to the network conference. A bunch of networks said, yeah, we want this show. History said, we'll run it straight to a series without a pilot. And we're like,
wow.
we'll do it. Yeah, which was cool. So we did our first season of Search for the Lost Giants. And I'll just, give some background.
Ever feel like your energy isn't what it used to be? Struggling with brain fog, slower recovery, or just feeling worn down even when you're doing everything right? That's why I've been taking Row Nutrition's liposomal NAD. and the difference is real. Sharper focus, sustained energy, and quicker recovery without the crash of caffeine or stimulants. NAD is essential for mitochondrial function, the powerhouse of your cells that keeps your body energized and your mind sharp. Until now, replenishing NAD has required expensive IV infusions. But Ro's advanced liposomal delivery allows your body to absorb it efficiently, without needles or crazy price tags. I've been using Ro's liposomal NAD for weeks, and it's a game changer. Pro athletes, trainers, and health experts are making it a staple in their routine because it works. And right now, you can try it risk-free with a 60-day money-back guarantee. Plus, get 20% off with my code DANNY at rownutrition.com/discount/Danny. Again, that's code DANNY for 20% off at rhonutrition.com/discount/Danny. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
There's this idea like the Smithsonian, they got, giant skeletons in the basement and all that. And there's this massive archaeological cover up. And I'm a fraud. I work with archaeologists and geologists and scientists, have them on a show. I'm friends with many academics. And the idea that there's some global conspiracy to cover up evidence is, even if it was desired, it'd be impossible, if you know what I'm saying, right? So we have this idea that there's a massive conspiracy to cover this, giant
Cover up
bones.
giants.
Yes. And I would say the only point I'm making is, littered within the Smithsonian's own ethnology reports, their scientists have described the unearthing of massive bones over and over again. And so it's embedded in their records. And in episode 2 of our show, well, I'll backtrack. And the Smithsonian claims that the largest skeleton that's ever been in their possession is a 6'3" Sioux Native American skeleton with acromegaly. That's like pituitary gigantism. It's a disease condition.
Right.
So they're claiming that, right? We're in Staleville, Missouri in episode 2, and we find the cave at Puckett's Cave, where they found an 8.5-foot skeleton. And we go through, we talk to everyone, we find where it was unearthed, and we go through the microfilm, and we find an 8.5-foot skeleton laying on the doctor's office next to 6'1.5" Les Eaton. We found a photograph of it, and then 15 days later, it's requested to be shipped to the Smithsonian. And I'm saying that the skeleton is there, wired together by University of Missouri archaeologists, and shipped to the Smithsonian. So, how does that shrink into something that's less than 6'3"? And the Smithsonian's own records have account after account that Hugh and I read about in our book, of similar skeletons that are claimed by their scientists to be over 7 foot, over 8 foot. So I don't have a time machine. You can only make educated guesses about the past, but to say that this is a ridiculous premise and I'm some grifter or weirdo, or, the way that the pseudo-skeptics often look at the alternative community of researchers is that it's like they're my ideological enemy, like in politics. I'm not going to yield an inch to them. I'm not just going to dismiss what they have to say. I'm going to denigrate them. I'm going to call them racist. I'm going to, do whatever I can to throw red meat to my base because I'm stimulated, because I'm some heroic gatekeeper. And on this end, on the alternative end, I would say I could run with this narrative that, I'm some maverick fighting the evils of archaeology, and I'm a great guy in being this bullshit echo chamber of true believers as well. But that's not reality either. Science is apolitical. Science is objective. I need to see and analyze a 10-foot skeleton to solve the case. I can't just spin bullshit. You know what I mean? So the moral of the story is, scientists are like cops. They should deal with a lot of shit. They deal with crazy people. Right. And they got to keep their cool to get the respect they deserve. You know what I'm saying? You go through all that hard work. I got my PhD. I am an expert in this field. Like Graham Hancock, for instance. Yeah. I may not agree with you, but this is what I need to see for your theory to be accurate. I have to see a 12,000-year-old date from some temple site in Egypt at the Assyrian or whatever. I need to see this evidence. All the other stuff, all the claims of racism, that makes people almost believe in conspiracies. You know what I mean? That you objectively state what is needed, and then if you show me this, I'm all ears, you know?
Right. Yeah. What did you make of that podcast with him and Flint Dibble? I was pretty impressed with Flint at first. I thought that I mean, Flint definitely did his homework and crossed his T's and dotted his I's with a lot of stuff. But then in hindsight, it seems like he was pretty slick in some moments.
Yeah, I'll say this: when you put yourself out there, there's a lot of assholes out there.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, they're calling for his job or they're personally attacking him.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, I understand on both. It happens on both sides. Like Hancock, you know, Cock gets called a racist, right?
Right.
Dude's in a biracial marriage.
Right.
He's all he's talking about is indigenous rights.
Right.
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 He's like an empathic humanist.
Yeah. Yeah. Flint knew exactly what he was. He tried to skate through that very smoothly on the podcast, but he no doubtedly tried to connect him to Nazis.
Yeah.
In that article.
And it's a good point to make or to highlight is that, you know, the idea that, you know, you engage in these alternative ideas and there's somehow it's laced with racism. Excuse me. Now, there's partial truth there. There are like white supremacists who believe like Nazi Superman built the mounds of America and stuff like that. And there was this mound builder myth that Native Americans weren't sophisticated enough to like build the geometric forms and everything they did. So there is, you know, legitimate beefs there. But, you know, they're saying that, oh, Hancock quoted Ignatius Donnelly in his first book, and Donnelly said some racist shit, you know what I mean? Which he did.
Did he really?
Yeah, he had some. But all the scientists of the time, you wouldn't believe how freaking racist mainstream science was for the longest time, up into the 30s and the 40s.
Right.
You know, repulsive. I'd repeat them, but they're so, like beyond repulsive. But I don't take that and paint that, you know, modern day scientists and academics with that brush. It's like they've clearly gone another direction. So it sounds like a sound argument, like, oh, they're all racist by Hancock looking for a lost civilization and saying maybe before the Inca, there was another race or beings that showed up. And the claim is from kind of the male-dominated white left-wing cult of academia. Sorry, that sounds like, you know, harsh, but it's true, that you're trying to take away the accomplishments of these people.
Right.
But the reality is the Inca, the Aymara, they told the Spanish that the gods and the Viracochas built these structures. There's clearly two forms of stonework in Peru. And it's not like, oh, you're stiff, you can't do this. It's like the native people are actually telling us there were two different eras, right?
Right.
But then you go to Malta, and the Maltese, what are they, like Sicilian farmers who came over in 5800 BC, but they have legends of giants and gods at Gigantea. The Greeks are the same way. These old megalithic walls are built by the Cyclops. You go over to Ireland, and the Tuatha De Danann, these mythical beings with high technology who came from lost continents or islands in the Atlantic, are attributed with the making of Newgrange. So I'm not getting in a fist fight with Sully at a bar in Southie because I said, no, the Irish ancestors didn't do it. But it's a charged racist thing with these other cultures that aren't white, right? Like, and I'll go, so there you go. That's the scope of it. And I'm saying, like,
it's all so stupid. It's all so dumb. I just had a genomics professor on here a couple days ago, and he was explaining how out of all like all the plants and other organisms that exist on this earth, we are the most homogenous one, meaning that like out of all, he studied all the human genomes, and our genomes are so similar, it's insane. There's so few variants from the blackest person in Africa to the whitest person in Finland. He said that all of the common ancestors of humans today came from like 10,000 humans. There was a bottleneck in humanity like tens of thousands of years ago, and he's saying that like we are so closely related. It's unbelievable.
It's the binary system. It's left and right. You know, we should have like a 5-party system. You know, but it's like I'm in an echo chamber. The algorithms are weaponizing my preferences. So I go and I'm addicted to outrage. Everybody is, right? It's like, instead of like, if you're a good person, go work at the homeless shelter. Don't pretend you're online being good. You're a freaking, like a coke addict looking for another hit, and that's fine. And I speak, you know, I was in that zone myself for a while, and it made me want to take like 100 showers. And I don't want to belabor this racist thing. I just want to like put it out there because like, honestly, a lot of pseudo-skeptics feed information to like The Guardian, and they do these hit pieces without asking Hancock's opinion of the matter, right?
Of course, right.
And that's not cool. You know what I mean? Shitty. It's like, it's like...
I also don't like what Flint did when he was on my podcast, where he said that people who purchase these on the antiquities markets are like doing a disservice to history, or like they should belong in museums. They shouldn't belong. He said that people who purchase these ancient Egyptian artifacts on the antiquities market are contributing to like a black market, or like contributing to cartels and this kind of stuff. And I don't buy that. That seems like a cop-out. That seems like, I don't know what that is, but that doesn't seem like it's coming from a good place. One
of my greatest teachers said, agenda makes you stupid. And I'm not saying, I'm not dissing Flint Dibble. I'm sure he's a nice guy, and we probably get along.
No, he was. I liked him. Me and him got along great.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'd probably shoot the breeze for like 3 hours and laugh our ass off. It's just, I understand where he's coming from. Like, there's a lot of assholes out there. There's a lot of pseudoscience out there. There's a lot of bullshit. There's no peer review in the alternative realm, right? So there's a lot of artists and grifters, and there's a lot of well-intentioned people who get it wrong too, because it is not their books, their presentations are not put up for peer review. They don't get critically analyzed. I could sit here and tell you, and they get these like softball like interviews with true believers and podcasts. So it's like, if I could spin you one side of a story and make myself appear to be the big hero who has all the answers. But if you objectively debate with someone, so, you know, Dibble's up against some real assholes who like denigrate him, or they call for his job. And that's why I've like...
man, it's vicious.
It's vicious,
The people that are against him online, it is the most extreme cult I've ever seen.
And bingo. And, you know, the left wing is its own virtue signaling, DEI, ESG cult.
Of course.
And like if I say, transgender, a man who transitions to a woman, I'm, like I said, a former coach, should not be allowed to participate in women's sports. That's like obvious. But I think like Congressman Seth Moulton just said that out of Massachusetts, and Tufts is going to stop doing business with them or something. It's like,
it's crazy.
That shit is like, so...
A few years ago, you'd get kicked off social media for doing that, for dead naming somebody or...
Exactly. And if Trump's victory is a repudiation of all that, you know? And I like to think of myself as moderate. And I really feel like people got to understand the algorithms are weaponizing your preferences, and they're getting you addicted to outrage.
Yeah.
I mean, being a coach helped me. Like, I got conservative parents, I got liberal parents. They both want the best for the kids. It's like, I don't give a shit what you vote for.
Right.
Like, it's a different dynamic. But will you indulge me for a second to read a quote and hopefully put the racist thing to bed?
Of course.
This is what Vine Deloria said. He was a Lakota Sioux elder, voted by Time Magazine as one of the greatest religious thinkers of the 20th century. He's an author. He wrote Red Earth, White Lies. He was critical of kind of white mainstream archaeology and anthropology. And he actually organized a conference in 1999 in Washington State where he had all these elders share their indigenous wisdom about giants, which is very interesting as well. So people say, oh, this is a fairy tale, you know, giants or whatever. It's like, how can virtually every culture on Earth and almost every Native American tribe have these traditions of giants? And that's something maybe...
When was he from again? What time period?
80s. I think he passed away in the 2000s.
Okay.
Recent.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Vine Deloria. The Indian explanation is always cast aside, let me see, as a superstition, precluding Indians from having acceptable status as human beings and reducing them in the eyes of the educated people to a pre-human level of ignorance. The stereotypical image of American Indians as childlike superstitious creatures permeates American society because Americans have been taught that scientists are always right, that they have no personal biases, and that they do not lie, which is... And a lot of indigenous scholars think the same way. It's like, you're dictating to us what we should believe. Because these ideas that the natives have are about floods, they're about giants, they're about lost civilizations, and they are a part of the belief system of the ideological enemy of science, which is religion and mythology, right? So it's like, I'm not going to yield an inch. So I'm going to make claims of racism where I kind of subtly and racistly do not listen to the traditions of indigenous people. So I just throw that out there. It's like time to pull that, if I got like a SS tattoo on my neck and I'm saying Nazi Superman built this and that, you could shit on me. But I'd like to put that to rest because I love working with professionals. I've organized archaeological digs. I sit and I talk to like anthropologists for hours on end. I've presented at university campuses and the kids, and I'm like a goodwill ambassador from Lunatic Fringe. I talk about fish gods and Atlantis, and I find these subjects interesting, and I just like, I want like in science, in medicine, allopathic medicine, alternative medicine, now you have complementary medicine. And I would like to see the same in archaeology and anthropology, hopefully.
Right. The first time I learned about you was from a gentleman by the name of Praveen Mohan.
Oh yeah,
he was in here, and he was pointing out some of the newspaper articles from like the New York Times from I want to say it was like the 40s and 50s, maybe, and they were showing actual excavations of these giant skeletons that were found in these mounds in like South America, and some were even in, I think one was in Texas maybe. And he was pointing out that like you were the like foremost guy around here that's researching this kind of stuff. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by TrueWork, a clothing company hell-bent on bringing you the most technical, high-performance workwear on the face of the earth. The TrueWork story begins in the Colorado mountains, where a trade worker knew there had to be a better solution than the wet, heavy gear that was weighing him down. And TrueWork was born. I love my TrueWork pants because they're a durable work pant that is so comfortable and stretchy that you can go golfing in them as well. Every TrueWork product is engineered for maximum efficiency, comfort, and protection. And when you put them on, you can feel the difference. When I put on regular cotton or denim pants, I can literally feel the 200-year difference in technology. TrueWork upgrades traditional classics with fabrics used by elite outdoor athletes. Soft, stretchy, sweat-wicking softshell work pants are a huge upgrade over stiff, heavy jeans. Wind and waterproof shells use intelligently placed insulation for streamlined warmth that lets you stay mobile and agile. TrueWork has over 50,000 five-star reviews and countless stories from trade pros in every state and every job across the country. Upgrade to TrueWork for a major change in the way you work. TrueWork helps you be your best when your best matters most. Check out their full lineup and get 15% off your first order at truework.com/Danny. That's 15% off at TRUEWERK.com/Danny. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
Yeah, first of all, I like him. He's a really solid dude, and he's into the traditions, like in India. Same thing. I've read all the Vedas,
right?
The Ashtavakra Gita, Ribhu Gita, all the metaphysical and historical texts of the Hindus, and it's wild.
Yeah.
So, what I found is like in 1939 at the Moorhis Mound in Texas, they found a massive skull. And there's a picture of it. And William Duffin was the archaeologist. It was like a WPA works project in 39. And I went to talk to him, and he passed away at like 106 a couple of years ago. Yeah, right? But anyways, the skull rests at the Texas Archeological Research Lab, and it's enormous. And then in 1933, George Fisher, head geologist of Pennsylvania, unearths a 7'5" skeleton. Donald Cadzo joins him on the dig. He is Oxford-trained archaeologist. He writes this article about finding a 7'5" skeleton, and then about 3 months later, he's cruising in a van with the 7'5" skeleton, talking about it, going to Harrisburg because the Smithsonian requested that it goes there, right? So that's where I go with this. It's not just like this drunk farmer from 1720. It is like respected professionals, including in the 50s and 60s, Don Dragoo, head of the anthropology department at the Carnegie at the Cresap Mound in West Virginia. They were destroying it for an oil and gas project. So he excavated and he found a 7'2" skeleton with massive bone structure, huge jaw. They call it the Adena jaw. And Webb and Snow at the Dover Mound in Kentucky, funded by the University of Kentucky, unearthed another 7-foot skeleton with massive bone structure. The Adena people elongated their skulls. There's all this mystery here, right? So you might say, 7'2" shack's that big or whatever. But there are so many of these accounts with massive bone structure, with jaw bones that fit over the face, of a much higher percentage than today's population. if you read through all the ancient documents. So, I mean, I'm sorry.
So there was a lot
historical
more
reports.
shacks walking around.
There was a lot more shacks, but they were like NFL linebackers. They weren't like skinny dudes either. And every explorer you can name encountered giant native chiefs. Tuscaloosa in Alabama, DeSoto, you know, him and his father. And the archaeological narrative is, you know, the Indians were like 5'7", 5'8", and the Spanish, the English, they were 5'2", 5'3", which is true. The general population was, but their leaders, the tall ones, the chiefs, they were on their knees. They towered over all our tallest men. You know, you read the accounts and these explorers who were trained in the art of observation, and they are talking about absolutely enormous tribal chiefs, all the way down to Patagonia. Magellan, Drake, DeSoto, they all encountered and recorded this happening. So it's just another, you know, just like polydactylism, extra fingers and extra toes, it's another aspect of the mystery that's ubiquitous. It's found around the world by cultures who had little or no contact. And that's what catches my attention.
What's the biggest skeleton excavation that you've seen, a human skeleton that you've actually like looked at? And
Good question. Well, 7'6" at the Mud Museum in Philadelphia.
And where did that one come from?
Kentucky. It came from Kentucky, but part of getting it is that they sent it to the Mud Museum with the understanding that they couldn't say where it came from. So I know it's very strange, but there's a 7'6" skeleton that's believed possibly to be one of these mound builder giants. But I will say we have that photograph of like an 8.5-foot skeleton that was found and shipped to the Smithsonian in 1933 that we found during our show in the microfilm, and we got it in our book. So it's this picture of Les Eaton, who's over 6 foot tall, next to an 8.5-foot tall skeleton. So to the argument I made, the Smithsonian is claiming that the largest skeleton they ever received was 6'3". So that, and I'm not saying, you know, modern day scientists, they probably don't even know these stories. But at the time, there was a particularly zealous, racist, pre-Nazi eugenist named Dr. Hrdlicka that ran the anthropology department with an iron fist. And
wow.
Oh yeah.
What's his name? How do you spell his name?
Hrdlicka.
Hrdlicka?
Hrdlick, Dr. Hrdlicka.
So you can find something about this dude. He sounds wild.
He was a Czech anthropologist. He was, a lot of the early scientists, there he is right there, actually were into this idea of giants. They were open to it. Their scientists wrote about, you know, a 36-inch circumference skull found by Thomas M. Perrin in Illinois, like massive bones in their ethnology reports. But he was the guy in 1933 who wrote and talked about giants and no more. This is wishful thinking. This is delusions of amateurs and things like that, ignoring the fact that his own scientists had uncovered and reported these things. So it's a really interesting dynamic. And I'm going to say something that's repulsive, but he also said and believed some of the most racist things you can imagine. He wrote and edited the Journal of American Anthropology in 1933. We write about it in our book. He said, the greatest threat to the American population is blending the inferior blood of the 1/10 of the Negro population into the superior white blood of the rest of of the white race. And he had all kinds of like that. And that's what scientists believed back then. And this is, you have Native American civilizations with these giant chiefs, the tall ones, with these legends of cannibalistic, warlike giants that are clearly in their traditions. You have magnificent geometric forms that predict eclipses. You have this vast and incredible Native American civilization, but they were denigrated and they were marginalized as a ploy to steal their land. And the scientists of the time went along with that too. It's like, we're not going to embrace any of this mythological, childlike ideas of the Native Americans. We're going to marginalize them, and that's what happened. So scientists today do not operate like that, but you got to be honest about the shit that happened when, in this crucible when modern theories were formed. And one of the missteps of science is that they pushed away oral traditions and native indigenous wisdom. So we don't listen to the Inca when they tell us something that lines up with a mythological idea. We don't listen to the natives that have been there for tens of thousands of years when they tell us that giants were a historical reality. That doesn't mean they were, but to dismiss them out of hand and portray indigenous people as superstitious and childlike, you can feel that too. When you're told about a native tradition, you know, you get this vibe of like, I have respect for their culture, but I don't believe this shit. You know what I mean? That's kind of like what we're taught by science. So sorry, that's a long-winded way of saying be open to indigenous traditional narratives.
It's funny. There's a weird sort of legend around this area of Florida. We're on what's called Indian Rocks Beach right now. The beach that's literally a quarter mile that way is called Indian Rocks Beach. And it's called Indian Rocks Beach because allegedly there's all these Indian burial mounds that are around this area. Mm-hmm. And there's, for some reason, over the last couple hundred years, out of the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hurricanes that have come up through the Yucatan and gone up the Gulf of Mexico, there's only been maybe 2 that have hit anywhere close to us. And they've gone probably at least 100 miles north or south. There's never been a direct hit within like 50 miles of this beach in like 1,000 years. And the legend is because there's these Indian burial grounds protecting Indian Rocks Beach. And just last year, not even a year ago, maybe 6 months ago, there was a report that was in the news where this lady was like redoing her, like building a house, and they like knocked down this huge Indian burial mound and excavated all these bones. And in the last freaking 3 months, there's been like 3 hurricanes that have hit us direct. And there's one coming right for us right now too. That's supposed to hit next week.
Oh, I didn't know that. That blows. Jesus Christ. We wrote
about
like
this has been the worst 3 months of hurricanes that we've ever had in this part of Florida.
We wrote about it's called the Sowers of Thunder effects. Anthony Robbins was a mystic and an author who wrote about giants and...
Tony Robbins?
No. Oh. Anthony Roberts.
Oh, Roberts.
Yes.
Okay. You know, Tony Robbins has gigantism too.
Yeah, it's like
he's got the pituitary thing,
yes,
where he's like he had like I think it was maybe a benign form of, but he's got like the gigantism traits or whatever, and he had that when he was young, where he got like really big. He's got the big jaw and the brow, and he's super tall. Yeah,
it could be like acromegaly or something like that. So he wrote this Anthony Roberts, I believe. Robbins, anyways, wrote about the Sowers of Thunder effect. When they opened the burial mounds around the British Isles, you would get like these incredible storms come up. And his thought is like these ancient geomancers, they built along ley lines. They used their divination skills to build and enchant the landscape. That's a John Michel thing, who was a mentor to Hugh Newman. He wrote about how you use certain stones, certain geometry, water, and energy lines to transform and enchant the landscape to bring peace and prosperity to the population. It's like this ancient druidic thought system, which is interesting. But every time you would open these burial mounds of the ancients, you would get wild storms, and they're all documented, and we get pictures of them, like old woodcuts of the explorers would go on the weekends and look for pots, and they're digging. And then the second frame is this wild storm comes up. And the same thing is it's like, natives were into weather shamanism and the mystical world. And that's another thing that's dismissed, this idea that there's another reality that we interface with. And I've spent a lot of time with indigenous wisdom keepers, with shamans, with tradition holders. And they tell me very specific and very strange stories about the nature of reality, about the invisible realms and stuff like that. And it's my personal experience, but I got to say that is exactly what they're saying. So you could dismiss them if you want, or you could say maybe there is something to the story, just like your burial mound story. It's like, at least be open to it, I would say. Like, what's your intuition? What's your experience tell you?
Right.
Like, who is that freaking gatekeeper in your mind? Who is the tyrant that is like smugly knows better? The ego. Right? Insidious, tyrannical. It feeds you self-loathing and doubt and conflict and judgment instead of forgiveness and empathy,
Right.
Like the subtle voice beneath the surface is your real state, your natural state. And the over-identification with the movie character, like this is the only existence I have. I got to freaking fight and scratch, and I got to get things externally. that clouds your judgment, that covers you in the worst impulses. And the ego is the conspiracy. You know, there are conspiracies in the world, but the ego is like a bad software program that makes you believe that your only experience is this right here. And that somehow it's like, you know, once they throw you in the ground, you're done.
Right.
Instead of the screen of existence, the ocean of existence, and not the wave. Your real state is eternal, unchanging, blissful, and God's at home, and we're the idiots who decided to take a walk. The allegory of the prodigal son. That's what the mystics tell us. So,
right. I think technology has been one of the big reasons that we've sort of lost this connection, this sort of spiritual connection that like we had, you know, like the Native Americans would have back in the day, or like the experience that you get when you're on drugs or on psychedelics like DMT or ayahuasca or whatever. Because there's people that talk about how like when they first go to the Amazon or whatever and they walk out into the jungle barefooted, like all of a sudden all these deep senses sort of arise, like from deep within them that have been buried because of this technological advanced society we live in North America, where we're surrounded by screens. You can call a car to pick you up there's an app on your phone to deliver food to your house. Like it's insane how much like electronic shit and technology and just the evolution of technology that we've surrounded ourselves with, I think is sort of destroying that connection to whatever sort of ethereal layer of consciousness that exists out there that some of the ancients would talk about.
Bingo, you nailed it. Even Rudolf Steiner, the mystic, called it Ahriman. He called it this dark, cold technological force that would overtake humanity, but it would be chosen by humanity. And I studied with John Gardner. He was super old when I studied with him, like in the 80s, and he actually knew Steiner. Steiner was like a mystic, like Edgar Cayce, and he talked about this cold technology would be accepted and wanted. So at the time, we're like, what is this technology that's coming around? My friends who studied Steiner, and like, we joke, it's like, oh, you're putting on the helmet, or they're going to have a TV that you have to leave on 24 hours a day in your house. We didn't know it would be the iPhone. It would be this insidious, dark, cold technology that brought about the worst impulses in humans.
Yeah.
It agitates you. It gets you addicted to outrage. And just be honest, you know what I mean? We've all been, you know.
They're dopamine slot machines.
Bingo, right? And I don't want to talk up my game, but, you know, part of my spiritual journey and my plant medicine ceremony is to look at all my embarrassing behavior, all my shortcomings, all my judgments, all my desperation around, you know, is my soulmate, you know, this heartache that we often feel. So I sat and I burned out that for years. I sat in silence for a long, you know, going Aaron Rodgers or whatever. I live in a 10-foot by 12-foot cabin, 10-foot by 12-foot. I have virtually no possessions. I drive in a beat-up old truck. I've been single for years. And I've come to a place of never being lonely, completely thrilled to be at peace in a meditative state or to hang out with friends and stuff. And my life is oriented around like serving anybody I can. Not like because I'm a fake good guy, because I feel like the world bores me to tears. You know what I mean? I dig ancient mysteries. I like metaphysics. You know, I'll mix in a little Celtics or whatever. But like the world of distraction and conflict bores the shit out of me.
Right.
And when you like reside and surrender into your real state, it's so enthralling. You're like, I can't believe I am that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's magnetizing us all, but we're swimming against the fucking river.
We really are.
We really are, right?
Strong river.
And it's
Niagara
like,
Falls is not far.
Bingo. And the moral of the story is you already are perfect. You're like, and we think of that in the context of a weird movie character who's temporary. I'm talking about your real state behind the scenes. And you can experience it in your temporary movie character. Excuse me. But it's like surrendering into that state versus swimming against the river, because we falsely believe this is all we are. So you got right. I need some more money, or I need a new girlfriend, or I need, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, because I feel like shit about myself because I falsely believe what I am not. And especially a character that the time is, you know, you're on the clock in a body, you know what I mean? I got to get. And now I just sit in silence. I don't freaking want anything. And I'm not saying that makes me right, but I like to think it positions me well to objectively take on these controversial mysteries, do shows, do all this other stuff I do. because I could feel like the overstimulation happen. You know, you're filming, millions of people watching you, like the camera's always following you around, you know, and my brother and I are pretty grounded and level-headed, but I could feel that, like, the cokehead part of me getting wound up. You know, it's like, oh, some MILF sending me a message, you know what I mean? It's just like, sorry, but it can be overstimulating. And I'm like, fuck that, you know, it's not like, it's not that I'm so good, it's that it reads disingenuous and it makes me feel like shit.
Yes.
And I'll tell a story here, if you'll indulge me for a sec. I did a ceremony when I came with the shamanista, and I asked, which guide me, because I'm going to talk to this dude that I have these karmic entanglements with, and has this, you know, you see mainstream media is fucking dying, right? I mean,
yes.
like CNN's laying everybody off.
Oh, yeah.
And
we learned that better than ever in this last election.
Exactly. So these formats are the new news. They're like just growing in popularity, which is great. And I applaud you on creating this way to communicate. But I'm in a ceremony, like I asked the spirits, you know, guide me and show me. And what I got was this, like, I was thrust into the field of the one that Rumi talks about. Beyond concepts of good and bad, there is a field, I will meet you there. You know, that, like, thank God I don't have to do anything to become what I already am, right? Just like that breath of fresh air. And Rumi was enlightened. Hafiz was enlightened. Ramana Maharshi, Jesus, Buddha, they have liberated themselves and wrote about what it's like to be in the state of the one. So I'm in the realm of the one, and I'm given a life review, and I see the scope of my life. And it's like every time I was arrogant, judgmental, critical, argumentative, it wasn't even like it was a real thing. It was just false and untrue. It was just like this lame energy that went nowhere.
Right.
And every time I was empathic and compassionate and helpful, I could just see this incredible, like, this is what you really are. This is the energy that's waking you up. And this is how you should behave, not out of good or bad. It's because it's your real state. You know how, like, judgment feels like shit?
Yeah.
And holding the door and smiling for somebody just feels good, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not some new age. It's like a reality. This is what you are. And it revealed it to me. And then you showed up, and I could see that we had different lifetimes together. I know that's a strange concept, but most of the world believes in reincarnation. All the masters teach it. And you are like an alchemist, like you and Rogan, that sets the stage for events like this can happen. Like you're objective, you're open-minded, you're self-reflective, and you don't take yourself too seriously. You just like, let's create this platform. It's like Plato's Academy. Honestly, that's what Plato did. He would just open up the realm of ideas. So I applaud you for that, but it was wild. It was fucking wild. And I know it's just like,
wow.
I can't like, I don't know if a bunch of iron workers are going to know what I'm talking about. It's my experience. It just is what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I thought it was just a real cool happening, you know?
Yeah, man. That is super cool. That is very cool. What, so you, from when I talked to Hugh, he was kind of explaining to me that you are really big into the investigation of the background of the Atlantis story as well. And from what I understand, Ignatius Donnelly was one of the first people to actually write a book about Atlantis, right? I forget the name of his book, but I had Flint come on to talk about Atlantis, and all the shit that Flint talked about, me and him disagreed on a lot of stuff. We disagreed on the vases, the Egypt stuff. But one of the things that I think that made a lot of sense that Flint said that I just can't get out of my mind is his the way he explained Atlantis and the backstory of Atlantis. It's hard to find a housekeeper you can trust to take care of every nook and cranny of your house, especially when you're not home. And between my messy kids and recording these podcasts every day, it's easiest not to steal the time away from the end of my day to clean. And that's where today's sponsor, Bubbly Cleaning, has swooped in to save the day. It's a home cleaning service that's consistent and affordable. It's easy to select a trusted cleaner based on reviews. And after seeing the people they employ, I have 100% trust in their service. I schedule a cleaning for almost every week, and even for events and parties. And the best part is, it's a huge relief for the wife, so I'm losing less time during the week and she doesn't feel overwhelmed. To schedule a cleaning, just go to bubblycleaning.com, choose a date and duration, and their service will match you with a cleaner. You can schedule as early as this week. It's all backed by a guarantee, and their Forever Clean membership saves you $30 an hour on all future bookings. Take home cleaning off your plate this spring by using Bubbly Cleaning. Head to bubblycleaning.com/Danny Jones to get your first 3 hours of cleaning for only $19. Again, that's bubblycleaning.com/Danny Jones to get your first 3 hours for only $19. It's linked below. Now back to the show. And Flint just happens to be, for what it's worth, his area of study, geographic location, Greece, and the time, 12,000 to 15,000 years ago, in that area of Athens, time it lines up perfectly with the story of Atlantis and the people who are writing about Atlantis and Plato and all that stuff. So the way he explained it to me, and I also had another friend of mine who is a classical philologist who has dedicated the last 30 years of his life to reading the ancient Greek literature. He read just endless amounts of philosophy, history, comedy, and pharmaceutical texts and medical texts in antiquity. And his ideas on Atlantis, as well as Flint's ideas on Atlantis, seem to line up. Specifically in the fact that Plato seemed to be a philosopher who was known for coming up with philosophical hypothetical ideas on like how to build the ideal sim city, or coming up with war games, which was the idea of the Timaeus and Critias, where they were coming up with a war game between Athens and this hypothetical advanced city of Atlantis, and what would happen in that hypothetical war. It's similar to his hypothetical idea of Plato's cave, right? Mm-hmm. Like one of the main points that Flint brought up is Plato's cave, the allegory of the cave, was a philosophical idea and an analogy he was trying to explain for humans to understand. And that's the reason that we're not looking for Plato's cave. Another thing is Plato was also really big. Like, he wanted to censor Homer. He didn't want the kids that were growing up being educated to know anything about Homer, because he thought that was not good for society. He wanted to come up with this noble lie for society to basically create this sort of Santa Claus for people so people could behave well and act right, not commit crimes. Like, he wanted this ideal society, and he wanted to create this sort of like a noble lie where he thought, I mean, to his credit, he thought that like the philosopher king should run society, below them should be the knights and all this stuff. So he was known for coming up with these crazy hypothetical abstract ideas and these thought experiments, right? Mm-hmm. And he wasn't known for being a historian. So if you combine that with what we know of Plato, with the historical timeline of what we know about Atlantis, which is an oral tradition. The first time it was ever talked about was like 1,000 years before Solon, right? And then it was an oral tradition for like 1,000 years. And then, I might be f***ing this up, I'm gonna do my best. But then Solon told Pliny the Elder about it, and then there was like another couple hundred years, and then Pliny the Elder told his grandson Pliny the Younger, who was 10 years old, and then there was like another 100 years, and then there was like an Egyptian priest who read some sort of texts. Maybe this was before all of it.
The temple priest of Sais.
Yeah, the temple priest. Right.
Transmitted the story to Solon.
Yeah. Right. But then there was never any actual evidence of that text. Like, he wasn't actually consulting the text when he told Solon, right? So this was prior to all these transmissions going down this chain over thousands of years. And then 50 years after Pliny the Elder's grandson, Pliny the Younger, told Socrates. Then another 50 years goes by, and then Plato writes about it.
Mm-hmm. No, those are all good points. Flint is right that Athens in 9000 BC
was bedrock.
There's no evidence that it was advanced culture.
Right.
So it's like that feeds into like, is this a noble lie or not? You know, is this an allegory?
Right.
And he did he did operate like that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, these ideas that, excuse me, just because Plato said it doesn't make it factual. Mm-hmm. It could be like, this might be worthy of further investigation. That's what I would say. The idea intrigues me. Let's see. Mm-hmm. I would say that there are other sources that talk about, you know, like the Tuatha De Danann show up from four islands, 4 Atlantic islands, and they show up in ancient Ireland, and these supernatural beings. And you have these stories of lost worlds and gods, and the Ogdoad and the Ennead in Egypt. And at the temple of Edfu, you have the building text, right? Mm-hmm. I saw you talking about the building text, right? So I reached out to Mano Safesadeh, who is translating them from German to English. Now, Dieter Kurth is a doctor who since 1986 has been translating the building text of Edfu into German, right? And the old French translations leave a lot to be desired. So Manu is friends with Dr. Dieter Kurth and interfaces with them, has them over for dinner, and he's taken these incredible texts and he's translating them now into English. So I just spoke at the KC conference with Manu, and I'm friends with him. Oh, wow. And I asked him about this dynamic of like, is Hancock's version of the Edfu text kind of a patchwork of wishful thinking? And he said, no, he got it right stunningly, because they're very difficult to translate. Ptolemaic hieroglyphs are very, very difficult in context. It's very difficult to understand. But he said, you can believe it or not, but these writings about the primeval land and the land of the gods and the first time, they are claiming that there was this lost island of the gods that was destroyed in the flood.
In the Edfu text.
In the Edfu text.
And when were the Edfu texts written?
It was a Ptolemaic temple, so 200 BC. I hope I got that date right. But
after Plato wrote about it.
But no, the traditions go way, way back. They're oral traditions carried and written down. And like the pyramid texts of Unis are super ancient, but they're even from more ancient traditions. And I will say Homer talked about Ogygia. That's his Atlantis.
Ogygia?
Ogygia. In the middle of the Atlantic.
Ogygia.
Yes, Ogygia. The Ogygian flood Plato talked about in Laws, Book 3. And he says it was 10,000 years before the invention of writing and music. So the date is like 10,600 BC that Plato points to for the time of the Ogygian flood. And Plutarch, and there's another geographer who's escaping my attention now, said that Ogygia lay 5 days west of England in the middle of the Atlantic. That they pinpointed this Ogygian paradise in the middle of the Atlantic.
Oh, there we go. Ogygian flood is a flood in ancient Greek mythology that occurred during the region of Ogyges, a mythical king of Attica and Boeotia. Oh.
Fact checked in real time.
Yeah, look at that.
Community notes.
Interesting. It says survivors moved to Egypt, which was called Ogygia.
Can you scroll down a little bit more so we can see like a timeline maybe, or like dates?
Ogyges. What happened to Ogygia?
Click on the Wikipedia.
Plato gives it a date of like 10,600 BC, I believe.
Oh, okay.
In Laws 3. It's for Homer, it's this this age of the gods, this ancient time. One thing I find interesting is like, we have a cold case, right? Science, anthropology, archaeology, they're a different kind of science. It's not like biomedicine
right.
or physics or math where you can keep repeating the same.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So it's a more ephemeral, difficult science. And that's not to disparage professionals, because it's really hard. So you got to find a new site. You got to carbon test. You got to have things in context.
Right.
There's a lot to it.
Yes.
Excuse me. So I, being the weirdo that I am, and I'm willing to go anywhere for a good story, and I bring in the clairvoyance, the psychics, Edgar Cayce, Rudolf
Yeah.
Steiner, Madame Blavatsky, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons. And what's stunning is every one of those groups or mystics say that Atlantis was a historical reality. There was a cataclysm that destroyed it. Humans were originally androgynous, a byproduct of genetic engineering by
What does
these
that word mean? Androgynous.
sexless beings, you know, kind of like my love life. It's like it's either possessing two sets of sexual organs or none. You know, it's really it's weird. Even Plato says, you know, Aristophanes displays the myth of the ancient androgen, and Zeus cuts us down the middle. We were first androgynous. Plato talks about it. Plato talks about Atlantis as a historical reality. Plato talks about the immortality of the soul. So all these psychics are claiming the same strange and specific thing. And you could say, maybe they just took information from each other, but it's like the Rosicrucians and Freemasons, they're kind of like tight to the vest with their info, you know? You read through their documents, you talk to people who are Rosicrucians and Freemasons, and they're like, they believe all their esoteric wisdom flows back through Egypt to Atlantis. So that's just interesting. So I'm open to these ideas. To get back to Ogygia, Madame Blavatsky said that Homer was correct. He was the first one. The Bard of Ulysses understood that Ogygia was Atlantis, you know? So there's you could say, I don't believe in Atlantis. The Aztecs call it Aztlan. You know, all these indigenous people have beliefs about a lost continent, Lemuria in the Pacific, Atlantis. I could get into plate tectonics and that it might be somewhat of a flawed theory, but I don't want to because it's a long. I'm just saying, be open to the idea.
Right.
And as a professional, it's like, you know, this is what I need. You know, we got to go over the Mid-Atlantic range and we got to find this, and this is the evidence I need. And you know, I'll reference, you know, I'm not here fighting a proxy war for Graham Hancock. I like Graham a lot.
Yeah.
And he's the one who got me into like ayahuasca, so I'm indebted to him. And he's just pushing boundaries. He's a maverick, and he's looking for, you know, Atlantis and this lost race, and that's cool. Because a lot of the mystics of old, like Plato, you ever wonder why his work is like almost so flawless? Albert North Whitehead says, Western thought is a series of footnotes to Plato. You know, Plato was a genius. Pythagoras.
Yeah.
Because
and Aristotle.
Aristotle, the scientists of old were a blend of spiritual, how do I say it? They were spiritual scientists.
Yeah.
They engaged.
They were all doing drugs,
They were
man.
all doing like ethnogens. They were engaging in rituals. They were liberating themselves from the false self, from the judgments and the ego self. So thus they were well prepared and objective to take on both sides of the street, the invisible realms and the visible realms. And, you know, so it's like they did that. So the scientists of today would be, it would be helpful. Like I say, skeptics are more afraid of ayahuasca than they are Atlantis. You know, I know
crazy.
I'm being a wise guy, but, and I don't even want to diss anyone. I'm just saying, like, you know, you might want to mix in a little plant medicine ceremony or some metaphysical, usually like when you have trauma or somebody you love dies or some crazy happens, you get a portal into the other realm, you know? So some people get it that way. It's like, it shouldn't have to happen that way to see through the veil of this matrix, you know? So once again, I would like a blending of spirituality and science. That would be cool in my estimation, and we'll see where it goes. I think the Trump election, and I'm a moderate, it's a repudiation of some of these ideas of grievance archaeology, of dictating through a virtue signaling cult-like lens of what the past is like and how people should behave. It's like all my lefty friends are like, they feel like they got to walk on eggshells all the time. Oh, do I get my pronouns right? Do I get the right flag in my, you know, profile and all that shit? It's like people want to be left the fuck alone, you know what I mean? Like Native Americans voted in the largest demographic way for Trump. Yeah. Right? So it's like, I'm a cracker. I'm Whitey telling you and dictating what racism looks like and how to protect you. Right. It's like, some of the most pragmatic people I know are Native people, you know?
Yes. And you know, some of that, I feel like some of that really only exists on social media, on places like Twitter and a little bit of YouTube and stuff like that. You know, my friend Julian Dory has this great theory. He's a born and raised in New Jersey kid. And he's got this theory he calls the Wawa theory. He's like, if you go online and you look at some of like the far right or far left, most bloodthirsty corners of the internet and see how riled up everyone is, he goes, if you want a real litmus test of reality, go to a Wawa. He's like, if I go to a Wawa, he goes, I see the girl with the green hair holding the door for the old guy with the Vietnam hat. Reality is that it's not really what you see on social media, and it's almost like the people who spend the most time on social. If you spend too much time on these fucking screens, that sort of becomes your reality.
Bingo. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's remarkable.
People don't interact like that in real life. No, man. When you go to Wawa, you don't act like that to people.
No, it's funny because, you know, I'm whatever. Like I said, try to be the goodwill ambassador for Lunatic Fringe, but it's like, here's the giant dude, you know, this cat's out of his fucking mind, you know, but it's like, I'm working with I've never got dissed in my face, you know what I mean? It's like, and I like a good debate. I don't want softballs. I want to like figure out the truth for real. Right. I absolutely feel that, and it's a manufactured, you know, you can get into like the CIA, and, you know, go listen to Bobby Kennedy Jr. and, you know, they iced his father, they iced John, and my house was like a shrine to the Kennedys when we grew up, right? My parents grew up in East Boston. My mother was Irish Catholic. Yeah. MLK, John and Bobby Kennedy all over the freaking house. Yeah. And it was like, the promise was that the Democrats were going to deliver a world without war, a world of sanity, a world of respect for everyone. Right. And then the left started falsely believing that's coming back if we get the right candidate, if we get back in power, and it never fucking happened. Biden passes the largest defense bill in human history. The left loves World War III now. We're fighting this fucked up proxy war in Ukraine, and Putin's like, we're printing trillions of dollars in the U.S. and because it's the reserve currency. That's what's causing inflation, not supply chain bottlenecks. And he's just like, you know, they had England and the United States pulled Ukraine away from the peace negotiations, 100%. Table, right? Yep. And then the Guardian, before it was a left-wing rag, was writing about that and cozying up to neo-Nazis and what, you know, the U.S. is hankering for World War III. And now it's just like, oh, the freedom fighters are taking on, you know, because Putin has some conservative views about like LGBT, you know, people and stuff like that. And so he's become this demon, you know, and I've never heard him. He says like, I'm all for people believing what they want and doing what they want. You know, I'm not going to get into that debate. The moral of the story is like, you have this insidious control system that divides people. That's why they're easy to control. Like you said, you hold the door for someone, you give a shit about someone. Right. And I felt it myself with the whole COVID thing. I got vaxxed, I got boosted because I thought I was being a good citizen. And then I'm taking a step back and I'm looking how people are treated, like Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. Is it Djokovic? Who was the tennis player, or Nadal or whatever?
Oh, I don't remember the tennis guy.
And they're totally getting demonized, right? Like they're complicit in mass murder. And I'm like, so anyways, it happens on the right too. I don't want to get long, I'm too late. I don't want to get too long-winded, but I just want to say that you're absolutely right. Get the fuck off, unless you listen to your podcast, get off the internet. Right. Get off. If you start feeling like shit and you're addicted to outrage, it's a red flag, you know? Right.
Well, I think the podcast shit is a good antidote to the internet extreme shit, because you can just put your headphones in and listen to something uninterrupted for 3 hours. That's what I thought was so cool about that Trump podcast, because this is a guy who has this, he is probably absolutely the most famous human being on earth. And he's been hyper famous for decades, right? And he's got this incredible brand, this real estate and entertainment sort of brand, right? Larger than life personality. But he exists in these overly produced television shows, commercials. And if you look at the news, like it's all kind of opinion commentary, short clips, and, you know, summaries of shit. But there's what has not existed until now is a long form 3-hour uncut stream of consciousness from that guy. And I thought that was like the most profound thing that happened with that podcast.
Yep.
Is like you actually get to see right through this guy and see what he's really about. Is he full of shit? Is he just a pull string puppet who just repeats the same shit over and over again, or can he hold a real conversation? Does he actually have real beliefs? What is he? How does he think?
One thing is that the maverick thinkers in the Democratic Party have been pushed out. RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh yeah.
They're not sociopaths. Oh, they're marketing conspiracy. The trafficking conspiracy and all this shit.
Right.
Like my left friends, I was like, I like RFK Jr., man. He talks about,
I love that guy.
This is how the CIA was formed. This is how they operate. And like, I don't want to end up dead in a dumpster, but this cat is right on.
And he's the first president talking about this crazy epidemic of cancer and autism and diabetes and obesity in the country. Like that is the number one problem. That's like the biggest killer out of anything. And he's the first president to actually talk about that shit in his campaign. That's
Bingo.
Insane.
And Elon Musk comes out of the gate. It's like the warmongers were coming after you,
Yeah.
And he's saying like, Pfizer, Big Pharma, Bobby Kennedy Jr. saying, keep your receipts, like that's not fascist. But Trump, like all of us, he's flawed. I admire, like, I'm like a recovering Catholic, so I got all these fucked up hang-ups, and it's like, I can only imagine being so embarrassed in the public eye, all the trials and all the, like, God, having your past indiscretions brought up and stuff like that. The point is that he's not pure evil and he's not sent by God to save the world either, be objective about it. And like 97% of DC voted for Harris, right?
Yep.
Is that elitist out of touch or what?
That's
crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that doesn't, I don't want to dismiss her, but they were just looking, the neocons got completely behind her. Dick Cheney, you're like the war machine, universally voted for a kid, she's out, I'm not going to do, well, whatever. She's not like savvy. She doesn't understand economic policy. She's kind of a figurehead. So this insidious plan can keep unrolling. We sell weapons around the world, we're leading to a path of destruction. So Trump's a hand grenade. We'll see what happens. But I would just say, being in the middle and more objective is a much saner place to be.
Yeah.
Because it's honest. It's like, I got my issues. I'm riddled with flaws. If I spend all my time demonizing someone, that's a fucking red flag,
Yeah. No, I mean, at the very least, like, if you want to call these guys, these people, like, if you want to call Trump like a sociopath or a liar, like, I'm sure he's lied before. I'm sure he's got some narcissistic, possibly even, I don't know if I wouldn't go as far to call him a sociopath, but I mean, you absolutely have to be a narcissist to some degree to want to be the president of the United States. But like, at the very least, if he is lying, I mean, she's been caught. I mean, her and Walsh, like, literally have like lied their ass off objectively. Like, it's been discovered, like, it's been exposed, all those lies that they told during their campaign. But like, if Trump's lying about all the shit that he's saying, at the very least, he's pretending to want to end the wars. He's pretending to support Bitcoin, and he's pretending to try to like push this healthcare initiative with Bobby Kennedy. So like, I'm going to take that over her any day of the week.
Early on, he was one of the only critics of the Iraq War. You had all the Democrats lining up, all the Republicans.
Yeah, he's saying he wants to release the JFK files. First of all, he wants to release Ross Ulbricht. So we'll see if he does this stuff. He says he's going to do it like first thing when he gets into office.
Yes. And I just got to say, Iraq War, Afghanistan War, once we start, all this moral superiority we feel as a country, man, our government acts in real bad faith, mass murder, you know what I mean? We traffic weapons around the planet. We're not the good guys, you know what I mean? No. And enough of that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we'll see where Trump goes, he could go off the deep end. He could like really highlight, at least just to talk about it. Like we spend, we're 36 trillion in the hole. You know what that means economically, right? The Fed raises interest rates. They hold it too long. Everything's cracking beneath the scene. We get the commercial real estate going on. We get the euphoria from the Trump election right now.
Right.
The 10 years moving up. There's a lot. The bond market is the world's investment market. It's not the stock market. The bond market is huge. The Japanese and the Chinese are dumping them because of toxic debt with $36 trillion in the hole once again. So the 10 year, it's going to become more costly, right? We pay $1 trillion a year in interest payments on our fucked up debt. We're like a cokehead kid who blew all the inheritance of our parents, and now we're like, and all this like good economic data is fueled by spending, by it's debt fueled prosperity that has to end. And it gets worse because now we're going to pay exponentially for the interest on the debt. That's a long-winded way of saying we have an insidious system, and stop fighting left and right and see and demand at least a temporary world of peace as a springboard to awaken and get the fuck out of the matrix. You know what I'm saying? Like, just demand peace. You know what I mean? I don't give a shit who the candidate is. Talk about wars, talk about what's going on. You know, shitting on Netanyahu is not the same as, you know, it gets conflated with anti-Semitism. I got Jewish friends and they think he's a piece of shit. You know what I mean?
Of course.
Right?
Lots of them. Me too.
And he's a sociopath. And he operates like when I go to Iraq or I go to Egypt, and, you know, I hope I'm not held accountable for the misdeeds of the U.S. government. You know what I mean? Just like, you know, Jewish people probably feel this like disgust at how their government is operating, just like U.S. citizens abroad feel the same way. It's like, this doesn't represent me, man.
Right.
So anyways, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much. I just want to express that, you know what I mean? Be kind to each other and demand a better world, not based on judgment and addiction to being right, but like empathy, you know?
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see if, like, you know, because the media is clearly owned by the left-wing establishment and the party, essentially the regime. So and it's clearly that they got to figure out, you know, they don't know what the fuck they were doing, especially with this election. They got really arrogant. They don't understand how this landscape works. They obviously were not able to like read the room as to like what was going on, and with her like literally trying to dictate how she was going to do the Trump podcast, like, you have to come to me and it's only going to be 1 hour because I'm too busy. Meanwhile, the following week she literally cancels a rally and her plane does a U-turn in midair so she can go do SNL. Yep. So like, you'll cancel a rally for SNL, but you're too busy to do Joe Rogan, and you're gonna make him come to you. Like, that's whoever was in charge of that. They like, maybe they're gonna try to figure out what the fuck they did and try to figure out a new strategy here, because Trump is clearly trying to, it looks like what he's trying to do is bring more unity. I mean, he just came out saying that he was going to like pay off her debts or something like that recently. Yeah. And like, for the sake of unity and to bring the country together. So we'll see if he can try to like turn this thing around and be more of like a JFK 2.0.
Yeah. The autopsy of the Democratic strategy isn't going too well. It's not. No. There's not a lot of self-reflection. It's like, oh, we should have got, Biden should have dropped out earlier. Not like, what is your message? You know, I could be a brilliant campaign strategist, but nobody would listen to me. Right. You know, they force out Bernie Sanders. I don't agree with his economic policies, but at least he's better than a lot they put out there. They push away RFK Jr. Like, it's like, we're going to work for people. We're going to work for, you know, you focus on economic needs. I'm going to have Republicans in my cabinet. We're going to like work together in a bipartisan way for real. None of that. It's like the cult members who remain in the DNC are doubling down. You know what I mean? Like Trump, you know, he's a racist. He's going to like deport everyone. He's going to do all this evil, you know. So I hope what you're saying is right. But what we really need is a multi-party system that doesn't have political machinery and funding behind it.
And term limits.
And term limits. And Trump's been talking about that. So, yeah, we'll see where it goes. This is just for people who like, you know, and I'm like a lefty my whole life because, like I said, I had this.
So was I.
Yeah, this glorious dream of Bobby and John coming back and liberating us from the octopus, you know, and it didn't happen.
Yeah,
you know?
No, I was same way. Raised like super left wing by my mom, who was has a master's degree in fine arts, lived her whole entire life in the university system, still that blue no matter who, and you know, like having conversations with her nowadays is like,
I know it's rough.
Tough.
It's rough. Thankfully, my parents are in the other realm. God bless them. But we never talk politics.
It's like now,
you know?
the Democrats today they're like the ones that support the Iraq war. It's crazy.
That's true. And the intolerance that came out of the left that I never dealt with, you know, I never saw that because, and it's not to shit on anyone because there's a of intolerance on the right. There's like a religious cult thing, of evangelical thing on the right that's a little over the top, and there's more of an atheistic cult thing on the left, and it is what it is. It's more like, evaluate what's going on, this binary dynamic and how it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I did want to, can we shift gears and talk about fish gods?
Let's shift gears, talk about fish gods. Before we do that, I got to take a leak real quick. Take a quick pause.
Fish gods.
All right, are we rolling, Steve?
We're still going.
All right, let's talk about some fish gods.
Which is great, man. It's like that it's so seemingly absurd. I love it.
Wasn't Vieira a fish god?
Let me start, if you would indulge me, by quoting Carl Sagan.
Okay.
First of all, I'll say that all around the world, the wisdom keepers, the culture heroes of virtually every culture, they were androgynous, amphibious, brother and sister, husband and wife, self-fertilizing genetic engineers who taught the arts of civilization, repaired the heavens after a cataclysm, and have many other traits in common, which is like right off the bat. And these are cultures that had little or no contact.
Wow.
And I'll talk about your boy Vieira in a minute.
Yeah.
So let me put on my old man glasses here. And this is Carl Sagan, right?
Okay.
So Oannes is the fish dude who shows up and teaches the arts of civilization that Berosus talks about, right? He has this strange bag. You see it in the Sumerian iconography, right? He's described by Berosus in 280 BC in Babylonica. We have his, which is no longer with us, but Eusebius of Caesarea and Alexander Polyhistor wrote about the work of Berosus in their works. So that's a long-winded way of saying he talks about how when in the early times, this fish being comes out of the river and teaches the arts of civilization to the ancient Sumerian people. And he's literally got like a fish's tail and a human aspect to it too. And that's what you see in the iconography. So we're being told that Oannes is one of these beings. And in fact, the 7 Sumerian kings of the kings list that goes back 250,000 years,
right,
they all had an advisor who was a fish god, who was an androgynous amphibious fish god. And Oannes was the first one for the first Sumerian king. And they lived these massive lifespans.
Wow.
So anyways, this is what our boy Carl Sagan, who I wish was around today.
Yeah.
He'd call out so much man if he was around today.
Oh, yeah.
Stories like the Oannes legend deserve more critical studies that have been performed heretofore. Such hypotheses are entirely reasonable and worthy of careful analysis. So, people can shit on him if they want, but I'm going off of what Sagan said about analyzing and trying to figure out the truth of fishy friends. Sumerian civilization is depicted by the descendants of the Sumerians themselves to be of non-human origin. A succession of strange creatures appears over the course of several generations. Their only apparent purpose is to instruct mankind. Each knows of the mission and accomplishment of his predecessors. That's the Apkallu, the 7 generations of fish beings.
Okay.
So the story starts in Mali, Africa, with the Dogon people. Professor Robert Temple wrote The Serious Mystery in the 70s. He's one of the most brilliant academics I've ever encountered. Robert Temple, Professor Robert Temple. He wrote The History of China with Newman, and the guy's freaking brilliant. So he wrote about the Dogon understood, supposedly, about the binary nature of Sirius, like white dwarf, black dwarf stuff. So a lot of people got bogged down in the Christian missionaries might have hooked them up with some idea about Sirius, for instance, like that. That's how they knew that. So I don't want to get bogged down in the controversy. What he really highlighted was that the Nomo, the 8, are androgynous, amphibious, self-fertilizing wisdom bringers who taught the arts and civilization to the Dogon people. So self-fertilizing means you literally procreate out of yourself.
Right.
That sounds bizarre, right? Self-fertilization. So let's go over and then remember what Sagan had to say. We go over to Sumeria. Now, give me a sec to talk about Sitchin, right? Zachariah Sitchin wrote about the Anunnaki gods, they're extraterrestrials. Nibiru comes around every 3,600 years. I don't want to shit on him because he's not here to defend himself, but he created this science fiction kind of version where he had some things right. The Sumerians are the Anunnaki, as far as the documents and the cuneiform tablets are concerned, created humans. They are genetic engineers. But Nibiru was like a mistranslation of Nippur in the Library of Nineveh. So he created this compelling but not necessarily factual, or you can't fact check what he had to say. Right? So the skeptics glom onto that and like, this is all a fairy tale. It's like, no, go back to the original translators and finders like H.V. Hilprecht worked for the University of Pennsylvania in the 1800s, late 1800s. He was an Assyriologist. He unearthed the Library of Nineveh. He found tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets. And in his book, The Expeditions of the University of Pennsylvania in Babylon, him and his colleague, Hugo Radeau, who got his PhD from Columbia in the 1870s, they wrote about the androgynous nature of all Sumerian gods. They are self-fertilizing androgynous beings that beget out of themselves. So he's highlighting the fact that all the Sumerian gods are self-fertilizing androgens, which is fucking wild, right? It's like that level of specificity. Now let's go over to Egypt. And on the temple, at the Horus Temple, the Edfu texts, which we had talked about, right? I got no social life, so it's 2 a.m. and I'm reading the old French translations of the Edfu text. I'm reading Yves Raymond, right, the highly regarded Egyptologist. She writes about the Ogdoad, the 8. Now, remember the 8 of the Nomo?
Yes.
In Dogon?
Yep.
The Ogdoad and the Ennead are brother and sister, husband and wife, self-fertilizing androgens who teach the arts of civilization. They're wisdom bringers. And 3 different passages on the Edfu text talk about the self-fertilizing nature of the gods, of the androgynous gods. They beget out of themselves. They are born without the mother. It's like clear that they are self-fertilizing androgens on the temple walls of Edfu, right? So you have this theme that is carried to China. Who creates humans? Fuxi and Nuwa. And Robert Temple writes about it. He wrote The History of China with, I forget his colleague's name, Joseph Newman, I think. So anyways, Temple says that the Chinese people firmly believe that a fish-tailed, androgynous, humanish hybrid, brother and sister team, twins, created the Chinese civilization. They taught marriage. It seems like a genetic experiment. We're going to teach you animal husbandry, the arts of civilization, marriage. We're going to control the population. So in all the tombs, you have the brother and sister with the entwined tails of Fuxi and Nuwa, all of the ancient Chinese tombs. You can go to Wikipedia. They firmly believe that these androgynous, amphibious, self-fertilizing beings were their culture heroes. And then we go to Peru, for instance. Viracocha emerges from Lake Titicaca. He is covered in fish scales at the Bennett monolith. His wife and sister and twin, Mamacocha, is also amphibious and androgynous, and there were temples all around Lake Titicaca before that were documented before the Spanish destroyed them, of her as like half human, half fish-tailed, right? So it's this story is carried over to Peru, and he creates humans. When all these beings are genetic engineers. He creates the giants, destroys them in a flood like Yahweh in the Bible, who's androgynous, and you have the same story play out across the ocean. So I'll give a couple more. Sedna in Inuit lore in Greenland of all places is androgynous and amphibious. And you go find this freaking stuff on Wikipedia. It's not like I'm cherry picking the data. And Sedna, Isis, and Kybele, one of the oldest goddesses in Asia Minor, Artampasa, and so many others were served by cross-dressing gay and transgender priests. Like showing that, that androgynous gender fluidity, if you will, this reverence for the androgyny. And the oldest temples on earth display the double-headed idol of the androgen. Jericho, Ayin Ghazal, they just found one at Karahan Tepe. Ered Ziffer is an Egyptian archaeologist. In 2007, she wrote, "The first Adam, Ayin Ghazal, and the two-headed statues that were found at Ayin Ghazal in like 8000 BC. The moral of the story, she's saying that ancient people firmly believed that the first humans were androgynous and that the gods and the engineers were androgynous, and they are displayed in the iconography of the oldest cities on earth." And then I told her, they just found a double-headed androgynous idol at Karahan Tepe.
They did?
They did.
Can you find this, a picture of this, Steve?
Hugh Newman, it's probably has it in his...
oh, yeah, Hugh probably talked about this when he came in.
So it's a long-winded way of saying, wow, isn't that a bunch of levels of specificity between cultures that had little or no contact, describing the culture heroes that taught them the arts of civilization in that similar way? That catches my attention. I don't have a freaking time machine. Who knows? Sagan saying, check it out.
Have you ever heard of John Marco Allegro?
Yes, the Dead Sea Scroll translator.
Yeah, he translated the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it seems like there might be a connection, but he basically came up with this crazy theory that, he was reading and translating those Dead Sea Scrolls, first of all, like dedicated his life to that. And essentially the connection he made was with, like, he thought that with the way Jesus was born, this immaculate conception, right? He connected that to mushrooms. They come from, rain hits the earth and they just appear. There's no fertilization that has to occur, right? They appear from mycelium, right? So it's kind of like the same way, like immaculate conception. So he theorized by connecting these Sumerian texts with the Hebrew texts that Jesus Christ was a psychedelic mushroom.
Yep.
But one of the gaping holes in his reasoning there is he was connecting Sumerian roots of words to Hebrew. And there is linguistically zero connection if you talk to classicists between those two languages. So for what it's worth, that's an interesting connection.
Oh, there's a double-headed idol right there. So I tell Ered Zephyr that I said, you should do a victory lap, because the paper is brilliant. He's like, I would propose the idea that the first humans revered by these cultures were androgynous. Aristophanes displays the myth of the ancient androgen cultures around the world. I was going to say, Marcia Silverblatt, professor from Duke University, writes specifically that there is no doubt that Vieira is androgynous. All these, like, an academic will tell you, these people believed that these were real beings who were androgynous. You could say, I don't believe it, it's a mythology, but the traits that I discussed are, an academic will tell you, yes, this is exactly what was being said there. And the iconography is remarkably similar at all these places as well. As if, this is like Hancock. I don't want to speak for him, right? But he's like, even in the show, he's talking about Oannes, he's talking about Vieira, right? He's beating around this bush of, like, androgynous fish gods showing up and being the wisdom bringers. It's such a strange concept. So he's like, oh, Jesus Christ, I'm so far on the limb anyways. I don't know his mind, but maybe he's like, I'll just keep it as like some lost wandering beings who teach civilization. Because if I get into the fish gods, watch out. But he's the one who kind of pointed me in that direction along with Sagan, So to your point about Allegro, I've read all his stuff, and I think he was off base in some. But like mermaid literally means virgin of the sea, right? Thoth, he born without a mother. The pyramid texts in Egypt, utterance 534, Neith, who is androgynous. Oh, I'm sorry, Nephthys. Her born without a vulva. Basically it's not a real world, Housewives of Egypt diss. It's like claiming that she is androgynous. She is a self-fertilizer. All these beings are described as having, they don't procreate in the same way as we do. Excuse me. So anyways, see, it's like, oh, you believe in mermaids, you're a fucking idiot. You know what I mean? Like that's how a skeptic would take this whole thing. But I said, my boy Sagan is saying it's worthy of further investigation. And you would look around these traditions, and I'm not a hyper-diffusionist. I don't think there was contact between all these cultures. How could they envision and come up with so similar, like brother and sister, husband and wife? Let me, if you would indulge me for a second, the idea of the crippled god, right? Androgynous Zeus, androgynous Hera, throw androgynous Hephaestus, the ironworker of the gods, off Mount Olympus because he is so deformed. He is limp, right? So the doctors have looked into it, like, was Hephaestus, did he have arsenic poisoning? They're looking for like a worldly way to describe it. So then we go over to Japan, and the two brother and sister gods throw Abisu. I mean, they cast Abisu out because he's crippled, and he's a fish god. And then you go to Egypt, and you have Ptah, and you have Osiris, who always has his legs wrapped and mummified. He cannot walk. Plutarch tells us that he gave birth in a self-fertilizing way to his next incarnation, who was Horus, whose literal name means like fish god of our earth or something like that.
Right.
I know, I don't want to like go up Rain Man here, but the scope of this, there are so many kind of hidden in plain sight aspects of this mystery. I think it demands further investigation. These are the gods who are the genetic engineers who created humans. Because people like, I'm down with UAPs. Giorgio says, like, the idea is aliens didn't build the pyramids. Who are the gods? That's what he talks about. But it's like, how do I portray you in the most kind of hurtful and disrespectful manner? You're a fucking moron. You think alien creatures built the pyramids, blah, 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 blah. Instead of, no, who are the gods? Salim Hassan, considered the greatest Egyptian archaeologist, I should say, in history, wrote in 1949 in the Sphinx that the Egyptian people themselves firmly believe that there was a succession of great gods that ruled for tens of thousands of years, right? So Salim Hassan says that. Manetho, who we use the dynastic classification system, starting with Menes in around 3100 BC, academics use that and agree that he's got it right. But the time of the gods and the time of the followers of Horus, which is 13,900 and 11,000 years, are considered mythological. So when I go to Egypt, I hang out with my boy, Yusuf Awan.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah, Ben goes and hangs out with him when he goes over there.
He's a super solid dude. You got to spread a lot of backsheesh around. You got to know people when you travel in Egypt.
His dad apparently worked with Edgar Cayce, right?
His dad was the great wisdom keeper, Hakim Awan, right? So what does he have to say? What do the ancient traditions of Egypt have to say? That there was a time of the gods that was older, that was like 10,000 years older and older, right? Not... in the main, so we have, this is a great racist argument thing. There are Edgar Cayce people who think the pyramids were built in 10,000 BC. Yusuf goes around and he shows...
How is that racist to say the pyramids were built in 10,000 BC?
Because somehow you're saying that the Egyptians couldn't have pulled it off themselves.
But they were Egyptians still, just older Egyptians.
Yes, I know. This is where it gets...
They were still African people.
But, the Egyptians did incredible things, like that we know of, like in Ptolemaic times, we know about Karnak, on and on and on. All I'm saying, or anybody who would take an alternative approach, is that the traditions state that the Sphinx, the Great Pyramid Complex, and probably the Assyrian, right near Abydos, are from an earlier time. I think Yusuf would say that too. So that goes to this and they found all these voids in the Great Pyramid, right? And
yes.
Robert Schuck and Thomas Dobecki found a void under the power of the Sphinx. So it's like, I don't know if the freaking pyramid's 25. It's inconclusive in my estimation, but maybe it's 10,000 years old. Who the f knows?
Right.
Let's get in there and see. Let's do explorations, because if there's something that is datable within the Great Pyramid, it would be contemporaneous with the date, either 2500 BC or 10,000 BC. And like Robert Schuck would say, the weathering pattern on the Sphinx is showing a much earlier antiquity. But that's just one piece of information. You cannot extrapolate and say that proves that Egyptian civilization is 10,000 years old. You need artifacts, carbon dating, in context. So I'm like, I'm always pitching shows at different networks, and I'm like, I dig the idea of excavating under the part of the Sphinx. I like the search for the lost Hall of Records idea. Who knows? I don't have a time machine. Don't you think people would dig that? You know what I mean? Like let's find out once and for all. And then we could like banish this realm of pseudo archaeology that it's claimed that like there's no basis in this, because a lot of the Atlantis myth is tied into survivors showing up in Egypt, these gods, these bizarre androgens.
Yeah.
That has a lot to do with this, the dating and the Atlantis myth. So let's see. Let's fucking do it,
Yeah. No, Ben was telling me, talking to me about Yusuf and how his dad was like a really big part of this Casey movement, or I don't know when Edgar Casey lived. I don't know if it was possible for his dad and Casey to know each other, but he was a part of this big Edgar Casey sort of organization, right? And he was explaining to me that there's like a lot more underneath the Sphinx than we know, and a lot that hasn't been excavated, or maybe has, but it's being held secret by like Zahi Hawass.
I was supposed to speak with Zahi and Mark Lerner at the Casey conference like 3 years ago, but it was so I didn't get to meet him and talk to him. The whole thing is fascinating. I'll give a little background on Casey. I just spoke there again at the ARE, and I love the Casey people. They're not like glassy-eyed zombies. They're like really cool. They're empathic. They're all about healing. Like, anyways, Casey was born in 1877 near Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and he basically would go into like this trance-like state, and give health readings for people.
Right. Crazy stuff,
right?
He apparently someone told him to sleep on a book or something, so he literally put the book under his pillow, apparently slept on top of a book or with a book under his head, and then woke up and knew all the information in the book.
That was actually, I think it was his father was telling him to do his study, so he slept on the book.
Right.
And then every page, he would open the page and know it. John Van Auken is runs the Casey Center there, and he's got all the kinds of stories. And I just did a bio on Edgar Casey for Ancient Aliens last season. It actually came out really good. So the moral of the story is that Casey would give these health readings. He would claim to tap in, not him, but just like to tap into the Akashic records of all existence. But then he started talking about past lifetimes, Atlantis, ancient Egypt, and in his waking life, he was kind of like a conservative Christian, and all he did was like read the Bible and stuff. So he was really kind of bummed out. But then he just went with it, and all this, all these readings came out, 14,000 readings, 25 million words. It's all documented at the Casey Foundation.
Right.
So Casey said Atlantis existed in the middle of the Atlantic, founded in 210,000 BC, talks about 3 cataclysms in 5028, and the final Younger Dryas one, 12,000 BC. So he has this timeline of Atlantis, and I just find it interesting because Casey got things wrong about future predictions for sure that he made, and he got things right that he should never have known about. Right. So he's the perfect, for me, case study. I'm not dogmatic, but I'm intrigued. Jonas Salk said, intuition points to where the thinking mind should look next, right? And something about the Casey material rings true to me, and we'll see. Like the idea of Egypt being older or stuff like that. So Hakim Awan, I can imagine, was connected to the Casey universe. But in a karmic sense, when you think in these terms, I think of like these beings keep orbiting each other in different lifetimes, right? So you have Zahi Hawass, Mark Lerner. They were both supported by the Casey Foundation. Hawass went to UPenn. Lerner's education was paid at Chicago, I believe, an archeological degree. And Lerner wrote a book, his parents were Casey people, about kind of proving the Casey material through the lens of archaeology and mysticism. But then he went against that, and he became a mainstream Egyptologist. But they still have this connection. So they were on the other. They play for the other team, but they're deeply connected to the Casey Foundation.
Right.
And then you have Robert Schock, you have Hancock, Bavall, all these people that are kind of floating in this Atlantis milieu, you know what I mean? I'll throw myself in there, you know what I mean? Just a little humble brag that I'm connected somehow to the Casey material and the people.
Yeah.
And I just think it's cool in this kind of karmic orbiting of different beings trying to unravel the story. It's just... It tickles my fancy.
My favorite theory is Chris Dunn's power plant theory about the pyramids. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote the famous book Giza Power Plant, and he followed it up recently with his new book, The Tesla Connection. And he has this theory that basically the Great Pyramid was this a solid state electron harvester. And that, I mean, he's the only guy who's like a legitimate engineer who has back engineered the Great Pyramid. Like he's looked through every single cavity and shaft inside the Great Pyramid, and he like built a replica and reverse engineered a way for it to somehow create free energy. And he has this theory, his variation to the theory. So he's evolved his original theory. And his new theory essentially is that the Great Pyramid and the two other pyramids, they sit on the Giza Plateau, which is a seismically active area there. So there's like a lot of seismic activity there, and there has been through history. And he hypothesizes that there was a hydraulic hammer device in the subterranean chamber that would hammer the earth and induce earthquakes, which would essentially bring up electrons through the igneous rock beneath the earth, up through the pyramid, which is built with igneous rock, with the limestone and all the granite. And all those electrons would somehow come through the queen's chamber, and there were shafts that were peripherally outside of the pyramid that they would pour. What was it? It was some sort of acid.
Yeah. Sulfuric acid.
Maybe sulfuric acid. I could be fucking that up, but they poured it in those
shafts.
They were like they were pits outside of the pyramid, and those pits fed the shafts that went into the queen's chamber. Right, because he believes that they're connected. When they sent that rover up those shafts and figured out there was that gate and Brinks door there, and then they busted through the door because the door had these little two electrodes that were coming through. Which is why would there be little two copper electrodes coming out of that door, that way up in the middle of that shaft in that pyramid that was supposedly a tomb? And he thinks that it fed liquid that acid into those shafts, and those electrodes were there to like keep the right amount of liquid in those shafts, and that would create this liquid or this hydrogen that would come up through the queen's chamber or the grand gallery, will create some sort of resonant frequency and create some sort of combustion in the king's chamber. And the two shafts that came out of the king's chamber were like masers, right? That somehow created some sort of a field of free energy that he believes powered that civilization that was there during that time.
Yeah, I'm friends with Chris. He did Hugh does an Origins conference in London, and I got to tell you, he's funny, man. Like behind the scenes,
he's hilarious.
He's hilarious.
Yeah.
I love Chris.
Yeah, what a great sense of humor that dude has.
Michael Cremo too, Forbidden History, or I think that's a book he wrote. He's another, because people don't know the personalities of some of these guys, man. I love Chris. I think, it might have been a multi-purpose use, right? I think we all believe it wasn't a tomb, you know? There's no adornment, there's no hieroglyphics. You get into the Howard Weiss 1834 seemingly forged cartouche and stuff like that. He's looking for funding, he's using dynamite, he's a piece of shit, you know?
Right.
So, and it's fine, you know what I mean? See, I know Zawi gets a lot of shit, but he pushes back because they've robbed antiquities from Egypt. They portrayed the Egyptian people in really bad ways over time. You know, science has. So I dig where he's coming from. I would just say, I think the archaeologists would agree with this. I think world government should lay out about $20 billion a year and do archaeological digs around the world, especially at this point in history, and figure out our past, because there may be clues within the past about like ways to understand our true nature and understand what's going on, you know, in time and space, all those big questions. But my point is, let's excavate under the power of the Sphinx. Let's get into the Great Pyramid as much as possible. Let's excavate all around the Giza Plateau. If you're interested in this, my boy Trevor Grassi and William Brown spoke at the Casey conference. William bought a piece of land near the pyramid, and they do have like a 3-series video set on YouTube. Beneath Gaza, no, the underworld of Gaza, for anybody listening who's into the story.
Of Giza?
Of Giza, yeah. So they're looking for the Lost Hall of Records, you know. They're not dogmatic, they're just following, you know, the traditions and stuff like that. So the moral of the story is, like, a lot of people don't believe the pyramid was a tomb. So let's find out.
Right.
You know?
And it seems like there's a lot of young Egyptologists that are coming up in Egypt that are taking Chris Dunn's stuff seriously and like looking more into it. So there's like sort of like a new guard who's looking at that. And like, we should look into this stuff that we don't understand. Like, we're never going to get anywhere if we just keep accepting the narrative.
Totally. And it's part of that cult-like belief system. It's like, this is a belief of my ideological enemy. I'm not going to give anything to this. It's even like, I'm a stonemason with engineering experience, and you look at like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, these Hugh probably talked about it, 12,000-year-old sites. Mm-hmm. It's not impossible technology, but it's like incredible work that requires like feeding this huge population and skilled masons and all kinds of organization through a civilization or a society of hunter-gatherers. That's where Hancock gets like, was there a transfer of technology or at the same time? Because it springs up everywhere, and the massive scale of it in Turkey now is just like incomprehensible how much of it is. But the skeptics, because they don't want to yield, they don't want to give anything to Hancock. It's just like, there's some rudimentary stonework. Instead of embracing how fucked up it is and how like paradigm shifting it is, So I would like more honest, objective evaluation. Like, let's take Hancock. He starts off in the 90s or the late 80s. He has his hypothesis. There's a cataclysm, and there's a lost civilization that's destroyed that goes around the world and teaches the arts of civilization. And lo and behold, we find the evidence for his cataclysm supported by an international team of scientists called the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis. Yeah. And if it wasn't considered a mythological and religious idea, it would have been accepted like 20 years ago. If you look at the evidence, it's pretty incontrovertible in my estimation. And then we find a super civilization in Turkey that's 12,000 years old. That was one of the main arguments against Robert Schoch. I am saying the weathering indicates like a 10,000-year-old date for the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx. He sits with Mark Lerner, and he gets scorn poured upon him. There is no contemporaneous advanced culture or civilization or temple sites around the world that meet a 10,000-year-old date. And then it happens, right? And I don't think the apologies came rolling in. And the same thing with Hancock. It's like, I don't agree with your theory, but you predicted or what came to support your theory has been evidence for a cataclysm and civilization being vastly older, right? You start there. Now, for me to buy what you're selling, I need to see more than just a thought from Plato that may or may not be true. I need to see this evidence and that evidence. But then you start on them and calling a racist or all this unhinged stuff, then you're losing the audience, right? Then you're like, that's not cool. You know what I mean?
Right.
And instead of like a scientist, once again, got to be like a cop. You deal with a lot of weirdos. You take a lot of shit, but you get the respect of objectivity. Science is apolitical. We need these dates. This is what we need to see. And I just say that, because, in the shortcomings of the alternative space, there's no peer review. You got an audience who wants to believe that you can fool and grift off of. There's a lot of flaws. There's not a critical analysis of everybody's theories oftentimes, but there are strengths too. There's intuition. There are a lot of people who are oriented towards metaphysics, because a lot of people get into ancient mysteries because they are interested in spirituality and metaphysics. Like Megan Fox, for instance, she liked my show, so she had me on her show, which is kind of
Megan Fox, the actress.
Yeah, Megan. She did a a Legends of the Lost a couple of years ago. She did a one season show, and the last episode was about the Clovis Barrier and giants and stuff like that. So we were talking, and we became friendly.
Really?
Yeah. She's really cool. She's into Edgar Cayce. She's into metaphysics.
Wow.
So we communicated back and forth. The first thing she said to me is like, I don't want to incarnate again. I don't want to tell stories out of school, but these are like glowing reviews of her as a person, so I don't think she'll mind. So she said, I don't want to incarnate anymore. She said, I'm into the Cayce material, I'm into ancient mysteries, but the rest of the world fucking bores me to tears. You know what I mean? And I said, I agree. It's like, what's our real nature? She asked about ayahuasca. I said, you don't want to incarnate again. Go read Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard, right? He's a non-dualist teacher. And it's about the false and temporary nature of the matrix and our true nature and stuff like that. And it's hardcore and it's radical because that is what non-dualism is. It's like you are not a body. You are a field of awareness outside of time and space with no concrete specificity like the false and temporary matrix. I know it's mind-bending, but every mystic throughout human history says the same thing. So I said, read the book, Megan. She reads it. I mean, she sucked it up in no time. Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard. She gets back to me and she's like, I'm in the gym the other day. I'm looking in the mirror and I'm flipping the fuck out and my image is disappearing. And she's like, I understand intellectually everything that's being said, but look, I'm a mother of 3 kids. I'm in my early 30s. What is it in the Matrix when you go back in, you take the blue pill or the red pill? She's like, I'm not ready for this. And I said, I dig that. And I'm not going to like push it. I'm just going to say the seed has been planted and you'll probably come back around to this. Because it's like, when you hear the truth, it's like a Zen koan, right? What's the sound of one hand clapping? That's not a question to be answered. It is a question to dissolve the questioner, the false egoic self. So her appearance is disappearing, right? And that she's having the Zen koan effect. Like, you ever see Jim Carrey talk in a dissociative way about his movie character? Like he's starting to move towards enlightenment. So he's talking about Jim Carrey, this separate being, as if it's a movie character.
Right.
And my brother and I studied with like an enlightened spiritual teacher for 20 years. Like, and you're like, what is that? Liberated from fear in this blissful state. You're like, how the fuck do I get there? You know? And the point is that he encourages almost a dissociative orientation around your movie character. Don't take yourself too seriously. You have karma to play out. Your true nature is benevolent anyway. So, if you're really in alignment, you'll do nothing but good deeds anyways. It's only the twisted whispers of the ego that get, leads you down the wrong path. So Jim Carrey talks about this like dissociative, in a dissociative way about his movie character. It's really interesting. And people are like, oh, he's a fucking victim of MK Ultra or whatever. It's like, no, he's starting to move towards enlightenment. And that's what happens. Like, and these are the lifetimes where you deal with all this shit, you deal with all this trauma, you reflect, you forgive. And then next time you have to show up in the Matrix, your parents are like mystics or whatever. You've undone so much. And then you flip the switch like Eckhart Tolle, right? Like, he came into this life, you're like, power, now I can't fucking focus, but he came into this life ready to be switched on or switched off, I should say. And that's what the mystics say, that you keep coming back to the Matrix until you break the cycle of reincarnation, but you undo all that is false about you. And that's the book Megan read. It's just like, you undo.
What's the name of that book?
The Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard. But it's not like the Course in Miracles is this kind of new channeled non-dualistic teaching, which is interesting, but the Advaita Vedanta, the Ribhu Gita, the Ashtavakra Gita, all these texts throughout history, the teachings of Lao Tzu, Ramana Maharshi, even Jesus in the Nag Hammadi scrolls, the Apocryphon of John, he comes to John and he speaks about the inexpressible one, the field of existence, in completely non-dualistic ways. Go read it. He's like a Eastern mystic, not the Jesus of kind of the evangelical movement. He's been transformed. The Gospel of Thomas, who Elaine Pagels talked about, the shortest passages, be passerby. Leave everybody alone. Do not try to change anything. Bless, forgive, turn the cheek. You are making it real by conflict and judgment. You are experiencing a false and temporary, and you can make whatever you want about the sojourn into time and space, right? People have different ideas. God made man, so man could become God. These theories of like, oh, God wouldn't know what it was like to like turn his ankle and see a sunset, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not like a white dude in a throne. The God is the field that you are. That's what the mystics say. The point is, I think it's worthwhile pointing to our eternal nature and then make of it what you want, because we could talk intellectually about this all day long, but all these teachings and ceremonies are geared towards the experience, the literal visceral experience of what you already are. So when you break through and you're in the zone of the one, you're in the field, all doubt is cast away. You don't even want to describe it. You don't even want to think. It's a realm without thought and time. It's fucking crazy. And it's awe-inspiring and enthralling. So I could talk shit all day, but it's just like, what can you do in your life to get you back to your real nature? And the mystics would say, forgive. Don't do it out of phony goodness. You're already perfect. So I don't want anything out. I don't want anything transactional out of you.
Right.
I don't want to fucking manipulate you to get an extra hit. I don't want to look for my soulmate on Tinder. You know what I mean? I want to treat people for what they are, which is divine, and forgive. And what I don't, I'm being a fraud and a piece of shit, you know, and a hypocrite. And you don't condemn yourself, though. You kind of laugh at your movie character.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So I know I went on a long rant there,
yeah.
but, you know, that's where I'm coming from. I think that's a kind of a cool
that seems to be the consensus with people who experiment with psychedelics. There's a guy who I had on the show about a year ago named Andrew Gallimore. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Yeah, he's doing this study called DMTX out of Tokyo, where he's putting people on extended state DMT trips. And they're essentially trying to like map the DMT realm, right? And figure out like what's going on and try to build some sort of consensus or some coherence of what people are experiencing when they're on these things like ayahuasca and DMT and what's going on. Because there's a lot of very similar things. Like it's not just like everyone's having their own unique experience. A lot of people are seeing and reporting the same exact sort of things, like entities and patterns and colors. And you know, he is a neurobiologist, and what he seems to believe is that there's more of a reality there, and what our brain is essentially like a filter, and our brain is here it exists evolutionarily to filter out everything there so that we can only sense what we need to survive and to evolve and to reproduce. And what happens when you're ingesting these substances and integrating with them is you're activating more of your brain so you can experience more of what's already there. Like reality, if we were to have our entire brain engaged and somehow be turned on, it would be something that's so overwhelming for us, we might just dissolve. Maybe we can only handle like a couple hours or 10 minutes of this, but it seems like there's definitely something there. And when you hear people talk about like their experiences with these drugs and tapping into this other realm or whatever it is, they seem to talk about these kind of things. Absolutely.
I've experienced that. A mystic would also say you're not going to experience all your lifetimes at once because it would be overload. You'd have a nervous breakdown, but you can, right. Why are there some psychics? There's some artists and grifters out there, but there's some psychics whose game is pretty tight, who have a good track record, right? So it's like, what are they doing tapping into the past and the future? It's because, Einstein would say it's a false construct in a false world for whatever purpose. It could be the experience, one of the shamans that I've studied with and did ceremonies with, at least there's a beauty in forgetting. It's like when you realize, you're in this blissful state of eternity and it's incomprehensible, but it's almost kind of a cool game to forget. Because when you remember what you really are, it's like so awe-inspiring. It's beyond comprehension. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I thought I was this hopeless piece of shit, but I'm this glorious divine being that has to do nothing to be what I already am. Right.
Right.
So I don't know about the nature of that. I'll just say that on a worldly level, it's worth looking into psychedelics. Are they letting us go into other dimensions? Are they showing us our true nature? You have Johns Hopkins just built like a $17 million research facility. End stage cancer patients are losing the fear of death, right? It's like, this is the shit that we need in our society. We don't want to demonize it. That's why I like Hancock again. He's always like pointing to psychedelics. And it's hard, man. Have you ever done ayahuasca? I know you
never
did
done
DMT.
Ayahuasca, just DMT.
It's like stop the ride. I want to get off. It's really rough.
Yeah, no, it seems terrifying.
Terrifying.
You got I imagine. I always thought. Well, from the descriptions I've heard of it, it sounds like you're literally going to hell and facing demons.
Pretty much. The demon's your own. Well, there's third parties in the room too. That's another strange thing. Like the spirit. Like if you do ketamine infusions, which are very helpful for intractable depression. Sure. There isn't a third party and there isn't a spirit being there. But ayahuasca, they call it like grandmother. It's like this supercomputer intelligence knows exactly what you need and will kick you in the balls. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's like it or she or whatever is seeing that there's a limited window to get to you. right? Because most people run from these things.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is what you need to see. You want to heal? You got to face this darkness. You got to face the ugliness in your subconscious that hasn't been healed, that's been calcified with trauma and false beliefs and self-hatred. And it's a deep dive. But then then you're like, it's unicorns and rainbows out the other end oftentimes. You're like, oh my God, I feel liberated. I feel a weight. I feel like my soul's come back to me, which is cool. But it takes some sack to get in there and do it. You know what I mean? And it takes it's not a weekend seminar that's going to heal your problems. It's the little changes you take every day. Like you catch yourself, oh, fuck, man, I'm back on Twitter. I'm back on Facebook. I feel like I'm worried. I'm filled with fear. I'm filled with survival concerns. I'm filled with emptiness and heartbreak and depression. And that's fine, man. Everybody, because we're in an unnatural state in this configuration as a temporary movie character that fucking dies eventually and gets sick and all this crazy shit. We are plagued with psychological difficulties. So have empathy for people. And this is another thing, people think they're like good online and they're helping and they're educating and they're fixing. And just like the vision I had, it's just like, you're just blowing smoke up each other's ass. Nothing good is happening. If you really want to be helpful, Lao Tzu says it. Look at all that is dark and unhealed within yourself. Ramana Maharshi, the greatest social activist in human history, does nothing compared to the seeker who forgives, who evaluates their own weaknesses and liberates themselves through forgiveness. And I found that, go work at the fucking homeless shelter. You know what I mean? Literally, there's got to be a family in your neighborhood that would be thrilled if you showed up with a freaking bag of groceries every week.
Right.
And this isn't a diss, but see where you're a cokehead looking for another hit on social media versus true empathy. Like, look somebody in the eye and do something kind for them. And that's not a judgment, because I've been in the fucking cokehead zone,
Yeah.
So, and then when I act out of empathy, a couple buddies of mine, we call the Hilltown helpers. We live in the Hilltowns, and we're always like shoveling off old ladies' roofs and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like, really, some old lady hasn't seen anyone in a while, and you sit down and you talk to her and you're kind to her and you do, and she's like, let me pay. And it's like, no, that's not what this is about, And it's those acts of empathy that really have an impact,
Oh, for sure.
When you look back at your life review, you're going to be fucking pissed if you didn't do more. And not more in a fake way, more in a loving, empathic way. And that's true. You can say this dude is like, hawking some new age philosophy, but I'm telling you, man, you can't even feel it. You don't even have to believe it. When you're truly kind.
Right. Yeah, man. Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. What other kind of stuff are you looking into that you're working on? Like, are you writing any new books? Are you working on any new shows?
We got a pitch. I want to give a tip of the hat. If you dig this fish god story, Paul Anthony Wallace is a friend of mine, and he wrote the Eden series. Paul, he's Australian. He's awesome, dude. He's a former archdeacon in the Anglican Church for 32 years. That's one level below bishop. He left the church, and he's writing about how in these ancient documents and ancestral narratives, there are these bizarre androgynous and genetic engineers that I talk about that are in the Old Testament. Yahweh has a consort called Asherah. They're androgens, right? The first Adam in the Bible is androgynous, and then Eve is made, through genetic engineering. That's that parable there. Anyways, he tells us this wonderful story throughout human history. He's half Ghanese. I think he's like half Welsh or English. And he's connected to all the African ancestral tales that tell the same story that I've been sharing about Viracocha and Fuxi. It's utterly fascinating. And he's a really solid dude on top of that. I mean, I'm sure you'll have him on at some point. But the Eden series is highly acclaimed. It's like this new version of the ancient astronaut theory almost.
Oh, wow.
But he's brilliant. I can't talk his game up. So anyways, we're kind of collaborating, and we got a pitch into one of the networks right now as a search for the lost records, investigation of the ancient gods that I've talked about here type of show. Go to Edfu and look at the Lost Hall records. And I'm also writing a book about polydactylism in the ancient world, extra digits. right? 6 fingers, 6 toes.
Yeah.
It's associated with the supernatural, the divine, and giants. The giant of Gath has 6 fingers and 6 toes. In Australia, you have rock art everywhere of giant feet with 6 toes. I was just touring with Hugh in Malta. We go to the Hypogeum in Malta, considered the underground temple, once thought to be one of the oldest temples on earth before they found Göbekli Tepe. They through construction building in like 1906 or something, they broke through to it. You go to room 20, there's an enormous handprint with 6 fingers there. You go out to the American Southwest, there are giant hands and feet with extra digits. You go to North Carolina, there's Judaculla Rock, where the Cherokee talk about the legend of Judaculla, and there's a 7-fingered handprint. The greatest hero of the Ulster cycle in Ireland, in the Táin, the English Iliad, has 7 fingers and 7 toes in the Oxford translation. Just throw out a couple more. You go to Botswana, Mat Singh emerges from the underworld with humans and animals, and there's a giant 6-toed footprint there or engraving there. And then you go to Kiribati, and on the island, there are giant, almost beyond belief, 6-toed footprints that the old men told anthropologist I.G. Turbert in 1949 about. They are attributed to the giants. So the world is littered with giant hands and giant feet associated with these giants that the indigenous people tell us about. So that's another, I know it's, here you go. See the giant foot and Newspaper Rock. On the left is Chaco Canyon. On the right is Newspaper Rock in Utah. Look at that, and there's this legend about... Is
that picture of that person's feet real? With 7 toes?
Yes, it's called polydactyly.
I met a woman who said that she was born with an extra finger the other day. She was from Haiti or something.
It's a rare genetic condition, and some people are born with extra digits.
It's pretty common in some the Caribbean islands.
Exactly, but it's associated with giants. It's associated with the supernatural. The sorcerers, exorcists, and temple priests of Samaria were obsessed with polydactylism. The Summa Ibzu is a series of 2,800 tetralogical omens, and they talk obsessively about what it means to have 6 fingers born on one hand, 6 on the other. The giant of Gath, once again, has 6 fingers and 6 toes, and there is no genetic condition that associates polydactylism with gigantism. So
really?
It's I get that if some freakazoid has a bunch of extra digits in ancient culture might say, oh, this dude's a god or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's everywhere associated with literal giant rock art of hands and feet. It's wild in cultures that had no connection. You go out to Baja California, El Carmen Cave, Google that.
Look at that. Giant footprint of Pingyang.
I'll say this. Professor Paul Tasson in Australia, I think the University of Kimberley, a couple of years ago, there was this story that went around the world that world's oldest ancient narrative found in Australia. This Aboriginal super ancient narrative. Mm-hmm. It was the Pleiades, it was the serpent, but it was also giant feet with 6 digits, right? So Professor Tasson actually wrote a paper about how he found these examples of giant hands and feet with extra digits in all these cultures around the world. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it, if you go to...
Dude.
Marawanga, Professor Tasson, Tacon, giant footprints, 6 toes. If you Google that, you'll get.
What is the conventional explanation for these footprints? Like that one right there on that rock that guy's standing next to, the Pingyang one.
It could be that it's that's 200 million years ago in granite, so I don't think a giant stepped in it. It could be the indigenous people carved it.
Yeah.
But then it raises its own kind of mystery because, if you could throw up Marawanga, Australia, 6-toed footprints, I know that's a lot, and we'll see if we get a picture of that. The moral of the story is, the androgyny that I spoke of and the polydactylism are displayed in the iconography of the oldest cities on earth. Ain Ghazal, Jericho, and they just found a 16-fingered statue at Karahan Tepe. Me, Andrew Collins, and Hugh Newman did an episode for Ancient Aliens about it, where say what you want, but these people revered this trait, right? So a saybirch is another place that was just unearthed that's super ancient in Turkey. And the dude's holding up his hand, he has 6 fingers. And the professor who did the excavation, Karul from Istanbul University, he said, what do you say? The statues of the humanoids always have extra digits or a strange number of digits, never 5. So the thing I'm talking about is being unearthed in real time at the oldest sites on the planet. Androgyny, polydactylism, make of it what you want. I'm just like, the story has a thread through the oldest iconography in human history. And it continues, like Malta, all these places. Yeah, 6 digits. Once again, I don't know, Marawanga, is it rejecting that?
Do you think that these giants were responsible for some of like the megalithic structures around the world?
See, that's the tradition. So like Pizarro and other Spanish explorers, right? They show up at Sacsayhuaman in Peru. They show up at Lake Titicaca and all the ruins there. And the Spanish are like, oh, these are built by demons. They don't know what to make of it. And they ask the Inca, they ask Pizarro, and they specifically said they were built by the Huaris, the giants, before an age of darkness and cataclysm, essentially. So that's what we're told. Because if I say, I don't know if you could build that, like with the tools of the time. That's not a diss against the Aymara or the Inca people. Then I'm right out of the gate like I'm some racist, But then again, go to Malta, it's the same story. And they're like freaking Sicilian farmers. But the point is that the indigenous people have all these myths and legends about giants. And Stonehenge is the same way. And, the Neolithic Britons, they're going to be pissed at me if I said giants built Stonehenge, And it's just like, I don't want to go round and round with that. But the point is, these traditions are the things that's interesting, not my theorizing,
absolutely.
Right? So what the fuck does it mean? I don't know. Is it pure fantasy? These people who we attribute having the wherewithal to do these amazing things are telling us these kind of wild stories. So you can't have it both ways. It's like, or at least be open to the idea that there's more going on.
Yeah, man, absolutely. What is that one on the bottom with all the holes in the ground? You see the one with the circular carvings in the ground? That's
Pueblo Bonito. That's a kiva in Colorado, and that's where the footprints going up the wall are. Yeah, the six-digit hands.
This is in Colorado?
That's in Colorado.
Wow. So
go to Palenque, and there's hands and feet all over the iconography there. Go to Peru. Go to, so many places are, and it's not just because we know it's a rare genetic condition. It's just not associated with like some gigantism. It's literally associated with the supernatural, the divine, the malevolent, and giants. And to any I've never analyzed a 10-foot skeleton. I know why skeptics are skeptical about the idea of giants. I just like, how can all these traditions exist? How can there be giant hands and feet associated? Not just, they don't stand alone, they're associated with giants. And the legends are.
Right.
The Cherokee, Judicaul in North Carolina, Mat Singh in Botswana, on and on and on. The Australian Aborigines, they have the same stories of malevolent, extra-digited giants like the Native American tribes do in the Southwest.
Right.
It's like, I'm not like cherry picking and trying to make an argument. I'm just saying, how can it be that there is no story there? I don't know.
Right.
I don't have a time machine, but it's pretty interesting.
I'm just curious, like, I wonder what the academic consensus is on that, and like, how do they try to explain it?
I actually, my book is like heavily dependent on academic sources. Like 90% of it is academic excavation reports, academic analysis. Dr. Richard Barnett wrote a paper in 1986 about polydactylism. He says the academic world has given this subject zero attention. And he was right. He's the first one to piece together like, holy shit, there's this polydactylism everywhere in the ancient world, right? So there were a lot of academics who took on, like Patricia Crown wrote in 2016 about how in Colorado at Chaco Canyon, the natives revered polydactylism, extra digits. So there's like an article about that. Other Warble and other academics wrote about Palenque and Mesoamerican reverence for polydactylism. They call it divine polydactyly. So you have different academics in isolated areas talking about it. And I understand the skepticism, but I would like to know, just like we had Professor Todd Disotell, evolutionary biologist, on our first show, and I love Todd, he's great. And I asked him, like, how can, what's the anthropological explanation for skull elongation all around the world between cultures that had no contact? It's the most bizarre and specific thing to do. Are they emulating what's going on? And, he didn't have, he's just like, I don't know how to explain it, essentially. And I agree. It's just like these levels of specificity by cultures that had no like when you have a kid, would you elongate little baby Timmy's skull? It is like so bizarre and so crazy. Goes back at least 10,000 years to China.
Right.
But you have it like Choctaw, a bunch of Native American tribes did it. It's fucking crazy. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of stuff where if it is dismissed as like garbage or lunacy by the academics or the pseudo-skeptics, people push back and they feel like these ideas aren't getting a fair shake.
Right.
And then they start to believe in conspiracies, and then they're down some TikTok rabbit hole.
Right.
Where the professionals should say, there's a real mystery there. I'm not going to jump to conclusions. This is what I need to see to prove the case. But that is very interesting. Common sense would tell you the level of specificity and the ubiquitous nature of these things is telling you it's worthy of further investigation.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to like bridge that gap. It's just like, take your foot off the brake a little. I mean, put your foot on the brake a little, chill out and address this as it's an interesting puzzle to solve, not a belief system of your ideological enemy, you know what I mean? Which is completely different.
Totally, man. Well, Jim, thank you for doing this, man. This has been a fascinating conversation. Super fun to talk to you about this stuff. I love learning about this crap. You and Hugh are really, I think you guys are really onto something with what you guys are doing and teaming up on this work. It's fascinating shit. That's great, man. It's just being open to these seemingly bizarre ideas is really cool. I think that's why your platform is so popular, and it's just like people dig it. And I hope, and I appreciate like, especially being, dudes, to like give permission to men to like talk about difficulties, talk about depression, talk about empathy, shit like that, right? It's really important to embody a contradiction, be the best of what a man is. It's not like a tough guy getting drunk at a bar and beating the shit out of someone. It's about like empathy and concern. And I really, that's the best part of it, that we're in the same zone there. And I really, definitely. I dig that. I appreciate it. Thank you, man. And where can people find more of your work or get in touch with you? I'm in the witness protection program of fucking Ancient Mysteries. I'm such a loser. I got like the tech skills of an Amish preacher. I know. I got to pick up my game. I'm on like Facebook. It's a picture of me and my brother at Roanoke when we're filming The Lost Colony of Roanoke. So I'm like doing this and my brother got hammers in his hand. And I got a couple dead accounts because I got freaking locked out of them. But I'll say at Hugh's site, megalithomania.uk, there's a Jim Vieira section of videos. I think that's the best place. Okay. And Hugh's always like, if I'm doing tours with Hugh or we're going to do a show or something, he'll post there too. So I talk about all this shit, Edgar Cayce, fish gods, metaphysical secrets of the ancients. There's all videos there if people dig any of this stuff. Or you can reach out to Facebook and, say hi or anything like that. Okay. But, one day I'll like get a tech assistant or whatever. But no, it's fine because I just like putting content out there. Absolutely, yeah. I don't want to push away prosperity, but I don't really want to try to overly monetize any of this. I just think it's cool and it's interesting, and I like that I can interface with both sides of the aisle, if you will. Because I got some tight friends who are like skeptics and they're always shitting on me and shitting on Atlantis and busting my balls, but I love them, you know what I mean? And it's not like, it's not confrontational. So thanks for everything, man. Yeah, man. I appreciate your time. Again, we got to get you on a flight. So, that's true. We'll wrap it up. All right. Goodbye, world.